Chapter 1967, Candlelight Expanse. Starmoon Kingdom, Zero Wing City. In a 7-story high-class restaurant a short distance away from Zero Wing's residence, 3 cloaked players observed the residence from a private room. Commander Cloud, the result of Miracle and Zero Wing's war is out. Here is all of the information we purchased from the secret pavilion regarding Zero Wing, a male half-elf said as he handed the male tigerkin before him a file. The war in the Black Dragon Empire ended when Miracle retreated from the Empire and announced its withdrawal from the war. What? Miracle was defeated? Chopped Axe, the female tigerkin beside the male tigerkin, was slightly stunned. How is that possible? That's Miracle we're talking about. The guild is even stronger than it had been at its peak. How could it possibly lose? As a member of the famous Death God Workshop, she was quite familiar with the various superpowers, especially their territories and overall strength. Miracle, in particular, was one of the superpowers the Death God Workshop watched closely. Not only had Miracle recently expanded its influence in God's domain, but it had also recruited plenty of well-known experts in the virtual gaming world. The Witch of the West, Alice, was one of the best examples. Recruiting Alice had significantly boosted the guild's overall strength, and not long ago Miracle had secured a key resource point on the Western continent. It only lacked a suitable opportunity to earn the public's recognition as a super guild. If Miracle were granted the title of super guild, it would rank in the top half in terms of power. Miracle had a boundless future ahead of itself. Hence, Chopped Axe couldn't believe that Zero Wing had actually defeated Miracle. Miracle has indeed lost. Everyone in the Black Dragon Empire is talking about it, the male half-elf, Frost Rain, confirmed. Miracle retreated because Zero Wing had dispatched 200 experts with combat power on par with peak experts, which caught Miracle completely off guard. Once Miracle realized that a protracted war would be a waste of time and resources, it decided to give up and return home. 200 experts with combat power that rivals peak experts. This can't be true, can it? Chopped Axe instinctively refused to believe Frost Rain's claim. Even an ordinary super first-rate guild only had that many experts, including domain realm experts and true peak experts. It's true, Light Cloud, the male tigerkin, said suddenly. According to the Secret Pavilion's report, Zero Wing has only accomplished this feat because it has used a tool called the Basic Combat Device. However, the Basic Combat Device has a relatively short duration. In addition, Zero Wing has the frightening magic-breaking crossbow. When a dozen or so of these crossbows are fired together, they can even instant-kill a Tier 2 Refinement Realm expert. If Zero Wing amasses a sufficient stock of these crossbows, its members will even be able to instant-kill peak experts. So, that's the case. I knew a new guild like Zero Wing couldn't be that strong. Chopped Axe could not help but wipe the sweat from her forehead. If Zero Wing truly had so many powerful expert players, it could easily deal with the Death God Workshop. All it would need was some time and resources. The various superpowers were inclined to overlook the workshop's activities for this very reason. Even if these tools have a time limit, they still pose a great threat, Light Cloud said as he rolled his eyes at Chopped Axe. Alright, we can return and report to the Chief Commander now. We'll let the Chief Commander decide how to deal with Zero Wing in the fairy country. After saying so, Light Cloud took a return scroll from his bag. He had no intention of wasting any more time in Zero Wing City. Frost Rain and Chopped Axe nodded in agreement. They had never expected Ninth Heaven to secure such a powerful backer. Meanwhile, the first thing Shifeng did after returning to Zero Wing City was store the rare materials he had obtained in the Black Dragon Empire in Candlelight's warehouse. He then had Melancholic Smile ramp up Candlelight's recruitment for lifestyle players and expand the firm's operations. Although the Candlelight trading firm was developing nicely, it could only afford to nurture a limited number of lifestyle players due to the lack of materials. As a result, Candlelight was restricted when recruiting lifestyle players. Fortunately, Zero Wing had secured 490,000 gold in rare materials through the war in the Black Dragon Empire. With so many materials, Candlelight could easily afford to recruit several thousand more members. Moreover, if Candlelight wished to develop in the Black Dragon Empire and Fairy Country, it would need a lot of additional manpower. As long as Candlelight established a foothold in these two countries, the trading firm's income would double at the very minimum. After all, both the Black Dragon Empire and the Fairy Country had far higher player populations than Starmoon Kingdom. Naturally, the demand for items in these countries would also be higher. Even if Candlelight did not become the #1 trading firm in those countries, it would still earn a sizable income. As for Candlelight's competitive edge, Shifeng wasn't worried about that. Due to the Philosopher's Hand, Candlelight had gained an additional 5 Master Lifestyle players despite the fact that Melancholic Smile had kept the item's usage to a minimum to keep it a secret. Among the 5 Master Lifestyle players nurtured, 2 were Master Alchemists, 2 were Master Forgers, and 1 was a Master Engineer. To Shifeng's surprise, Silent Wonder had successfully created an advanced alchemy recipe as well, thanks to the assistance of Titan City and the Philosopher's Hand. Now, Silent Wonder only needed to create one more advanced alchemy recipe to become an intermediate Master Alchemist. An intermediate Master Alchemist was no less important than an intermediate Master Forger. In fact, an intermediate Master Alchemist played an even greater role in raiding team dungeons. Unlike basic Master Alchemists, intermediate Master Alchemists could craft Master Potions with a feasible success rate. If a team had a full stock of Master-ranked defensive or resistance potions, the raid would become much easier. Guild Leader, the auction for the virtual stores has concluded. Not a single corporation is willing to rent our stores. In contrast, the virtual stores in the 2 guild toes are selling like hotcakes. Melancholic Smile said, visibly worried. Although we've earned some credits through selling the weapons and equipment you gave me earlier, it's only enough to maintain the training ground for a short time. Nobody is willing to rent? Shifeng was slightly surprised as he examined the information on the nearby guild towns Melancholic Smile had given him. These towns have certainly developed quickly. They've already ensnared over 40 corporations? At this rate, won't they become intermediate towns in less than 10 days? The guild town's development had exceeded Shifeng's expectations. Both had already invested in enough defensive structures to rival an intermediate town. Even more surprising was both towns' defensive magic arrays, protecting the towns from monster assaults. These defensive magic arrays were the reason that the various corporations were so confident in investing in the towns. Guild Leader, you're still in the mood to joke around? Now that we've moved to the new training ground, our daily expenditure has gone through the roof. With the credits we currently have, we'll only last another 5 or 6 days, Melancholic Smile said, exasperated. She had already seen Liang Jing's financial report, and she had been horrified. The number of credits the guild spent each day was absurd. We're burning through that much money? Even Shifeng was surprised when he saw the daily costs. He hadn't realized that Ouroboros had spent such a frightening amount of credits each day to maintain its training ground. The operational cost of Zero Wing's training ground could already rival that of Shadow in the past, and this was only the beginning. As Zero Wing recruited more internal members, the costs would increase. However, Shifeng revealed a faint smile after a moment and said, let's see who can outlast who then. Shifeng instructed Melancholic Smile to sell some of the crafted level 50 bronze and mysterious iron equipment for credits. The credits from these sales should help the guild survive for a while longer. Although primordial gas slowly spread throughout the Witch's Hill, increasing the local monster's strength and weakening players' combat power, monsters still needed time to evolve. After Shifeng settled his affairs with the Candlelight trading firm, he used the 7 Luminaries ring to teleport to the Million Forests teleportation array. He then spent 1 magic crystal to teleport to the Otherworld gate. The Jealous Witch appeared not long after Shifeng had arrived. She quietly hovered in the air while looking down on Shifeng. Young adventurer, why have you returned so soon? The Jealous Witch demanded. Lady Witch, I have completed the task you gave me. Here are the 200,000 magic crystals you asked for, Shifeng said as he removed 200,000 magic crystals from his bag, instantly forming a small mountain before him. Once all 200,000 magic crystals were accounted for, the Jealous Witch waved her hand lightly, and every crystal vanished into thin air. At the same time, the gigantic Otherworld gate released a dazzling glow. Primordial gas surged out. Then, a series of system notifications reached his ears. Chapter 1968, Divine Runic Armor. System, you have triggered the new expansion pack, Primordial Heart. Starmoon Kingdom Region System Announcement. Players have triggered the new expansion, Primordial Heart. The Primordial Heart will descend in the Witch's Hill in 3 hours. Please prepare. The system announcement echoed in every player's mind throughout Starmoon Kingdom. When it finally ended, players fell into heated discussions over the new expansion. What's this Primordial Heart thing? Has some major event occurred in the Witch's Hill? This new expansion pack will definitely be a huge opportunity. I wonder how Witch's Hill will change this time? I knew I should have gone to the Witch's Hill to develop. Starmoon Kingdom's players shifted their focus to the Witch's Hill the moment the system announced the new expansion pack. Previously, due to the map's strange phenomenon increasing monsters' strength and reducing players' combat power, only strong independent players had ventured to the Witch's Hill to level and grind. With the addition of the various large guilds' competition over the region's resources, it had become nearly impossible for ordinary players to get a share of the area's benefits. Hence, the Witch's Hills hadn't been very popular among independent players. Only the various large guilds and adventurer teams still vied for the land. Naturally, the kingdom's independent players weren't the only ones paying close attention to this new expansion. The various major powers in the Witch's Hill had launched fervent investigations to learn what changes this expansion pack would bring to the region. So, this is the Primordial Heart's activation condition? Surprise flashed in Shifeng's eyes as he read the system notification. The Primordial Heart expansion pack had appeared during his previous life as well, but it hadn't activated until long after the Otherworld Gate had been discovered. Now that he had triggered the expansion pack so early, Shifeng did not know how to feel about it. In the past, the Witch's Hill's Otherworld Gate had been discovered far too late. A large number of players had already reached Tier 3, and as a result, the Otherworld Gate had only been considered a good area to grind for unique materials and for independent players to level up. It hadn't been a particularly valuable map. While it was true that the new expansion pack was an opportunity, the Primordial Heart expansion had hardly been any help to players in the past. When Shifeng had sealed the Otherworld Gate, it had caused the Primordial Heart's descent, increasing the primordial gas in the Witch's Hill. The gas, in turn, increased the strength of the region's monsters and decreased players' combat power. Even the monsters' levels had increased considerably, though the level cap was still level 70. As for the monsters that had come through the Otherworld Gate, not only were they quite powerful, but their bodies also contained dense primordial gas. When these monsters were killed, they had a certain drop rate for primordial crystal fragments, crystallized primordial gas that contained intense, turbulent energy. One could synthesize these fragments into primordial crystals, which contained even denser energy. The primordial crystal was one of the best materials for nurturing living mounts, even more effective than energy essence that dropped from the Eclipse Gate's monsters. After all sorts of monsters had ruled over God's domain during the ancient area, and they had become so powerful due to primordial gas. However, the primordial crystals had a drawback. Although they were far more efficient than energy essence when nurturing mounts, they could only increase a mount's rank to bronze rank. Hence, players in Shifeng's previous life had considered the Primordial Heart expansion pack useless. The majority of large guild members had already nurtured their guild mounts to bronze rank by the time the expansion had taken effect, and ordinary players hadn't usually had mounts that were capable of growth. Only guild players that intended to replace their guild mounts had any use for the primordial crystals. However, the primordial crystals were far more valuable to current large guilds. God's Domain's guilds had only started to acquire stables and grow their guild mounts. If they could upgrade their members' mounts to bronze rank with the primordial crystals, they could significantly help their guild's development. Mounts could provide some assistance in battle once they reached bronze rank, and they were considerably faster than common mounts. However, while the Primordial Heart expansion pack would benefit the various large guilds, it also came with plenty of trouble. Activating the Primordial Heart expansion pack would double the number of monsters in the Witch's Hill and increase the number of field bosses in the area by several-fold. Moreover, the field bosses' raid difficulty would increase, making survival far more difficult in the Witch's Hill for current players. In addition, the monster sieges would occur far more frequently. Originally, guild towns and cities' chances of being besieged by monsters had only been 10% to 20%. However, once the Primordial Heart expansion took effect, those chances would increase to 20% to 35%. As Shifeng pondered about how to deal with the Primordial Heart's descent, the jealous witch who still hovered in the air began to reclaim her youth. In a matter of seconds, the old hunchbacked lady transformed into a charming middle-aged woman with fair, supple skin. Her black robe also transformed into a pitch-black, sleeveless dress. She now wore a black mage hat as well, and her wooden staff had become one made of black jade. As she hovered, she radiated an indescribable charm that drew others' gaze. Excellent. Young adventurer, you have helped me seal the Otherworld Gate in time and avoided catastrophe for Starmoon Kingdom. You have also helped lighten the curse I bear. Take this magic array design as a token of my gratitude, the jealous witch addressed Shifeng. This should have been the end of your job here, but sealing the Otherworld Gate had made the Witch's Hill unstable. I now need your help to collect 100,000 primordial crystals. If you collect the necessary primordial crystals successfully, I will give you this forging design I acquired from an ancient ruin after much difficulty. Saying so, the jealous witch waved a hand, and a tome of dragon skin parchment appeared in her grip. The dragon might the tome radiated was so powerful that Shifeng even struggled to move. When he saw the large words on the cover, his eyes widened in shock. The divine runic armor design. That was an epic forging design. However, unlike ordinary epic equipment, the divine runic armor was standard equipment, created during ancient times. It was similar to the standardized equipment design he had acquired from Titan City. Although the divine runic armor was standard equipment, it was still epic equipment, on a completely different level than dark gold equipment. Chapter 1969, Chamber of Commerce. As the jealous witch finished speaking, the sound of a system notification reached Shifeng's ears. System, congratulations. You have accepted the inferior legendary quest Witch's Sin. Quest content. Collect 100,000 primordial crystals in 30 days. Quest reward, divine runic armor design. After the system notification repeated 3 times, the jealous witch vanished without a trace. Now only Shifeng remained before the otherworld gate. Collect 100,000 primordial crystals in 30 days? Shifeng frowned as he fell deep into thought. This inferior legendary quest was simply ruthless. Only chieftain rank and above monsters dropped primordial crystal fragments, and the drop rate for chieftain monsters was only 3%. Furthermore, synthesizing a single primordial crystal required 10 fragments. He'd need 1 million primordial crystal fragments to complete the jealous witch's latest quest. Completing the question wouldn't be that big of an issue if it didn't have a time limit, but there was a time limit. There weren't even 100,000 guild members operating in Zero Wing City right now. Trying to collect 100,000 primordial crystals in just 30 days would be a nightmare. It seems I have no choice but to increase the guild strength and give it a try, Shifeng thought to himself as he decided to recruit more players. Fortunately, there was no penalty indicated for failing the quest this time. Thus, the penalty wouldn't be too severe if he failed. Even so, giving up now would be a waste. Unlike standardized fine gold and dark gold equipment, standardized epic equipment was in no way inferior to ordinary epic equipment when it came to basic attributes. The only difference was the lack of additional skills and effects, as standardized equipment didn't have as many to offer players as ordinary epic equipment. Even so, the various major powers would consider the equipment precious since epic equipment was still so rare in God's domain. Had the divine runic armor been ordinary epic equipment, though he wouldn't be able to mass-produce it due to the rarity of the required materials, and forging the equipment would have been far more difficult. Even an intermediate master forger like himself would only have a small chance of success, and no first-rate guild could afford the total production costs. Only a superpower would have any hope of mass-producing ordinary epic equipment at this stage of the game. However, crafting standardized epic equipment was a different story. Standardized epic equipment had been designed with mass production in mind, so it didn't have high material requirements. Most importantly, it wouldn't be as difficult to forge as ordinary epic equipment. Even an ordinary first-rate guild could afford the production costs if it gave the design to an intermediate master forger, not to mention Zero Wing. Following which, Shifeng took out a guild transfer scroll and returned to Zero Wing City to prepare for his newest quest. At this point, players from all over Starmoon Kingdom had swarmed to Zero Wing City, skyrocketing the city's player population. As players wandered the city streets, an excited energy crackled between them as they waited for the Primordial Heart's descent. Many adventurer teams had even started to purchase useful magic scrolls and potions in bulk. As soon as the Witch's Hill began to change, they'd rush to take advantage of the opportunity the new expansion pack presented. For a time, Zero Wing City became extraordinarily lively. Guild leader, good news. Due to the new expansion pack, Zero Wing City's player population has finally exceeded 10 million. Aqua Rose exclaimed when she noticed her Shifeng's return. Moreover, the 7th Street Chamber of Commerce has invited us to join their merchant alliance. Aside from combat guilds, God's domain had lifestyle guilds, and unlike their combat-focused brethren, lifestyle guilds focused on developing lifestyle players and producing a wide variety of products. Some of the larger lifestyle guilds generally allied to form chambers of commerce. These chambers of commerce were not to be underestimated. They were only unknown to the general public due to their refusal to interfere with combat guilds matters. However, they didn't lack influence in God's domain. The best chambers of commerce's influence reached across more than a dozen kingdoms and empires, and they had even more wealth than some superpowers. In fact, many up-and-coming superpowers received funds and resources from some of these top chambers of commerce. Meanwhile, the 7th Street Chamber of Commerce was one of the most powerful in God's domain. Joining one of the top chambers of commerce was extremely difficult. Ordinary first-rate guilds didn't qualify in the least. Normally, these chambers only accepted superpowers or large guilds with bountiful resources. What are their conditions? Shifeng asked. He was very familiar with God's domain's chambers of commerce. To join one, a guild had to meet certain conditions and pay a certain price. The membership cost requires that we supply the alliance with shops and virtual stores in all of our guild towns and cities. We will have to supply at least 5 shops and 2 virtual stores in each, all of which have to be in different locations in the town or city. In addition, they require that our guild sell the alliance 30% of the unique resources we obtain from the Otherworld Gate at market price, Aqua Rose said. That price a little high, Shifeng said, shaking his head. Tell them that Zero Wing will only give them up to 3 shops and 1 virtual store in every town and city. As for the Otherworld Gate's unique resources, we'll sell them 20% at most. Moreover, I require that they buy the resources at 30% above market price. If one wished to acquire the resources a Chamber of Commerce offered, they had to contribute to the alliance. However, 7th Street's asking price was simply too high. The potential benefits Zero Wing would gain weren't worth the price. The Otherworld Gate's unique resources would become a massive source of income for Zero Wing in the future, and purchasing these resources on the market would become immensely difficult. Meanwhile, the fact that Zero Wing City was within the Witch's Hill meant that Zero Wing would have a greater competitive edge than other guilds when fighting for the Otherworld Gate's resources. Hence, 30% of Zero Wing's harvest was no trivial amount. Furthermore, 7th Street wanted to purchase these resources at market value. This, Shifeng's counteroffer clearly troubled Aqua Rose. Joining 7th Street wasn't easy. Its influence encompassed over a dozen kingdoms and 3 empires after all. If Zero Wing joined 7th Street, it would elevate the Candlelight trading firm's income to a whole new level. Yet, Shifeng demanded far more than the 7th Street's offer. However, seeing Shifeng's determination, Aqua Rose had no choice but to forward her guild leader's reply to the Chamber of Commerce's representative. After dealing with the 7th Street's offer, Shifeng instructed Aqua Rose to recruit players in Zero Wing City before he returned to his special forging room in Candlelight, carefully retrieving the void field design from his bag. He then clicked on the design to learn it. Chapter 1970, 7th Street Sea of Death, Thunder Island. Big Sis Rain, we've secured the advanced speedboat design. Once we have the materials, we can begin production. Blue Phoenix excitedly reported as she entered the room. Although advanced speedboats were not particularly rare, they weren't available in large quantities. The majority of the various superpowers' armadas was still made up of ordinary speedboats. Only the core fleets had a higher number of advanced speedboats. Meanwhile, as players reached higher levels, the competition for resources on land grew increasingly intense. As a result, more guilds shifted their focus to the sea every day. Since Thunder Island was the best locations to develop naval strength, new guilds constantly arrived to take advantage of its resources. This increased competition on the island. The Dragon Phoenix had worried about the increasing competition, but now that it had acquired an advanced speedboat design, it could further fortify its fleet strength by mass-producing the advanced speedboats, maintaining its lead on the island. It seems they completed the quest. Phoenix Rain breathed a sigh of relief and smiled when she heard Blue Phoenix's announcement. She then changed the topic and asked, "How are things with 7th Street? I've sent our nomination to the Chamber's representative, and 7th Street has accepted it. However, Zero Wing apparently thinks the Chamber's asking price was too high. Unfortunately, 7th Street has its own bottom line. Zero Wing doesn't have claim to a lot of resources, and its territory isn't that large. The only thing Zero Wing has going for it is its temporary victory over Miracle. Zero Wing still doesn't qualify to join the alliance, and 7th Street's representative has stated that the Chamber only agrees with our nomination since you were the one who made it. Now that Zero Wing has rejected the offer, his hands are tied," Blue Phoenix said. Zero Wing rejected 7th Street? Phoenix Rain blinked in surprise. 7th Street was one of the top chambers of commerce in God's domain with as many as 3 super first-rate guilds in its alliance. The alliance's other guilds also had the backing of powerful corporations. The chamber had access to bountiful resources as well. By joining the Chamber of Commerce, one would have access to a variety of conveniences, and as long as they had enough money, they could purchase rare materials in bulk. The alliance also sold valuable items that were almost never available to the public. But 7th Street's connections were far more important. By joining 7th Street, one could sell their products in the Chamber's territories, and the 7th Street only demanded a 15% service charge. If Zero Wing joined 7th Street, it wouldn't lack a market to sell its products. Joining 7th Street would be a golden opportunity for Zero Wing. Yet, Zero Wing had rejected the offer. MHM. Apparently, while he's still willing to return the favor he owes us by helping in another way, he can't do anything more about the situation. Blue Phoenix nodded. She was just as frustrated about Zero Wing's response. Alright then. Since Zero Wing has its own plans, we'll let the matter rest, Phoenix Rain said, smiling bitterly. It seems we'll have to find some other way to pay Zero Wing back. She had nominating Zero Wing as a candidate for the 7th Street's alliance as a way of thanking the guild for its help on Savage God Island, but the Chamber of Commerce had its own rules. She couldn't possibly 7th Street to accept Zero Wing. Meanwhile, in Zero Wing City's Candlelight trading firm, Shifeng focused on learning the void field magic arrays drawing process. Drawing field magic arrays was incredibly difficult as, unlike other magic arrays, field magic arrays consisted of multiple arrays. Even a basic field magic array involved 2 to 5 different magic arrays. The void field, a large-scale advanced field magic array, consisted of 12 advanced magic arrays, and all 12 had to be closely interlinked. The slightest mistake would render the link useless. The void field was several times more complex than ordinary advanced magic arrays as well, and even an advanced magician like Shifeng was under immense pressure when attempting to draw the arrays. Just learning how to draw the 12 magic arrays individually had taken him nearly 2 hours. Sure enough, this thing is amazing. It's no wonder why it can rival master magic arrays. Shifeng took a deep breath as he examined the design in his hands. In the past, the void field had even been effective against mythic monsters. Field magic arrays weren't like arrays that summon magic barriers. Magic barriers were mainly used to suppress boss monsters, so they were even effective against high-ranked monsters. As long as one used an advanced barrier, a team could suppress a mythic monster. However, field magic arrays had to cover a larger area, thinning its energy distribution. Even suppressing Grand Lord-ranked archaic species would be difficult, not to mention mythic monsters. Fortunately, the void field could manage it. Although it wasn't as effective as an advanced magic array, it could suppress an ordinary mythic monster's attributes by 15% and Grand Lord-ranked archaic species by 25%. Lower-ranked monsters would be suppressed by at least 30% with a maximum of 40%, and the void field could cover a 3,000-yard radius. Moreover, the void field could be useful in large-scale combat. Although the void field would be half as effective against players, a 15% to 20% attribute reduction would be fatal, especially to expert players. Now that he had an inferior legendary quest and had to take down countless monsters that were strengthened by primordial gas, Void Field would be the best tool in his arsenal. If he activated Void Field, even Tier 1 players could easily defeat Witch's Hill strengthened monsters. Naturally, Tier 2 players would enjoy at least double the grinding speed. Shifeng then began to craft the Void Field magic arrays. Void Field required incredibly precious materials, and chief among them was Void Blood. Each set of scrolls required 12 drops to produce, and only powerful void creatures had a chance of dropping Void Blood. These 12 drops of Void Blood would serve as the core that controlled Void Field's 12 magic arrays. Fortunately, Shifeng had acquired 2 bottles of Void Blood after killing the Void Serpent, with each bottle containing 100 drops. If he failed to produce the Void Field, all of the Void Blood he invested would be destroyed. The rest of the materials for the Void Field cost over 500 gold per set, making each attempt extremely expensive. However, money was not Shifeng's main concern. The material's rarity was far more important. Hence, he needed to be extremely careful with each set of materials. During the production process, Shifeng had activated Soul Fire to clear his mind. Each of his strokes on the blank magic array scrolls was smooth, but just as he reached the final step and linked the 12 magic arrays together, something unexpected happened. Boom. After a bright flash from the magic arrays, the light faded to reveal an empty table. All of the materials Shifeng had used had disappeared. Seeing this, Shifeng sat back and fell deep in thought. Following which, Shifeng attempted to produce the void field twice more but failed both times. He couldn't help the heartache he felt over losing 36 drops of void blood. Sure enough, trying to draw the void field as an advanced magician is pushing it. After giving the matter some thought, Shifeng took a source of void from his bag. An advanced magician would only have a 50% success rate when drawing ordinary advanced magic arrays, and a much lower success rate when attempting to craft top-ranked advanced magic arrays like the void field. If he wanted to produce the void field successfully, he'd have to increase his success rate. Fortunately, an elemental source could do more than improve a magic array's effects. It could also increase production success rate. Everything happened as Shifeng expected. His previous failures were due to his low success rate. His fourth attempt to draw the void field was far more smooth, and the flow of mana within the array had calmed. After Shifeng finished the 12 magic arrays, he began the final linking process. A short moment later, the 12 magic arrays released a dazzling light, illuminating the entire forging room. Was it a success? Chapter 1971, Primordial Heart Descends. As the light in special forging room faded, a brilliant magic array appeared on the table. The 12 arrays had combined perfectly to form a gigantic silver magic array that caused the space inside the room to freeze. As the silver magic array flowed into the 12 magic array scrolls before Shifeng, the room reverted to its original state. The 12 magic array scrolls across the table then began to glow with a silvery light. Wonderful. I finally succeeded. Shifeng was a little excited as he gazed at the scrolls on the table. Although he had gone so far as to spend an elemental source, he had, at least, managed to produce one set of void field scrolls. With this, he could proceed with his plans. Following which, Shifeng inspected the magic array scrolls. So strong. Shifeng was ecstatic when he saw the attributes displayed. The original void field only encompassed a 3,000-yard radius, but after Shifeng had used the source of void, the radius had increased to 5,000 yards. Moreover, the strengthened void field could suppress a monster's basic attributes up to a maximum of 50%. It would also suppress mythic monsters by up to 20% and Grand Lord ranked archaic species by up to 30%. Most importantly, void field's duration had increased from 12 hours to 24 hours. Although a 24-hour duration seemed short to Shifeng, who was very familiar with the ins and outs of the Witch's Hill, it was plenty of time, especially now that the primordial heart had descended and Witch's Hill's monsters had grown stronger and more numerous. After the primordial heart had descended in the past, a forbidden land had appeared in the Witch's Hill. To be precise, a crack in spacetime had manifested, serving as the entrance to the forbidden land. The place beyond the spacetime crack was partly considered a forbidden land due to the spacetime seal that had been placed on the map, preventing players from teleporting there. Moreover, all of the monsters beyond the crack originated from other worlds. Not only were they incomparably powerful, but their combat standards were also higher than monsters in the outside world. Including the randomly appearing boss monsters, players of the same level would struggle to survive in the Forbidden Land. Fortunately, since mainstream players had already reached level 100 by the time the Forbidden Land had manifested, its level 70 monsters had been no threat. On the contrary, the Forbidden Land had become an excellent location to grind for equipment and materials. As monsters originating from other worlds, they had a much higher drop rate for weapons and equipment compared to monsters that were born on the continent of God's domain. Many of the materials they dropped were also unique to other worlds, and they had a chance of dropping the resuscitation potion recipe, which even level 100+ players coveted. The resuscitation potion only had one function: resurrecting players. However, unlike the healer class's resurrection spells, a player wouldn't lose any EXP when resurrected with the resuscitation potion, although they would have to endure a weakened state for 12 hours. During that time, the resurrected player wouldn't be able to fight. Furthermore, the resuscitation potion could only be used once every 24 hours, and it couldn't be used on tier 4 or above players. In God's domain, even if a healer resurrected a player, they'd still lose a considerable amount of EXP. When players were resurrected through the system, they'd lose an entire level of EXP. Regardless of how they returned to life, players would have to grind for several days to recover their losses. Hence, the resuscitation potion had been extraordinarily popular among players in the past. Only, the resuscitation potion recipe was not easy to acquire. Normally, it only dropped in other worlds, and as a result, man players had fervently grinded in the Witch's Hill's Forbidden Land despite having already reached level 100. Due to the recipe's rarity, players had even been able to sell it for several thousand gold in a proper auction. Demand for the resuscitation potion had also been relentless on the market. Despite the 20 silver production cost, the potion had sold for 2 gold per bottle. The resuscitation potion had even sold for 3 gold per bottle at its peak. Many players had made a fortune through selling resuscitation potions. Unfortunately, the Witch's Hill's Forbidden Land was extremely dangerous to Tier 2 players, but now that Shifeng had the Void Field, he could lead his guildmates to grind there. Not only would they level up quite fast, but they could also grind for the resuscitation potion recipe and primordial crystal fragments, killing 3 birds with 1 stone. Now that Shifeng had experienced successfully producing a Void Field, he continued to craft more. He knew that he had made a mistake when combining the 12 magic arrays during his first 3 attempts, but after his success he had a more accurate grasp of the array's flow of mana. Following which, Shifeng attempted to produce the Void Field magic array 4 more times, resulting in 2 success. The outcome was barely tolerable. Glancing at the bottle of void blood in his hand, Shifeng noted that only 4 drops remained in the bottle. It wasn't enough for another attempt. He had previously spent 2 bottles of void blood to activate the teleportation array to the Otherworld Gate. Hence, if he wanted to craft more Void Field magic array scrolls, he'd have to collect more. These 3 sets should last me quite some time. Taking a look at the 3 sets of scrolls in his hands, Shifeng decided to travel to the Forbidden Land to grind. Once his guildmates were settled in the area, he'd look for more ways to acquire void blood. Following which, Shifeng left the Candlelight trading firm and made his way to Zero Wing's residence to prepare for his trip to the Witch's Hill's Forbidden Land. The primordial heart had descended in the Witch's Hill some time ago. As a result, the number of players roaming the city streets had visibly decreased. The various adventurer teams and guilds had long since left the city to explore this new expansion pack. The majority of the players still around were merchant players, including members from chambers of commerce. These players were currently purchasing monster loot or selling consumable items. Purchasing magic grass in bulk. 3 silver per stalk. Buying as many as you have. Offer is available long-term. 4 Seasons Chamber of Commerce purchasing primordial crystal fragments for 20 silver per fragment. 21 silver for those selling more than 10 fragments. 22 silver for those selling more than 100 fragments. Selling primordial crystal fragments for 25 silver each. Only 3 fragments remaining. First come, first served. The voice of hawking players filled the street. The shops on both sides of the street had also put out signs stating that they would purchase primordial crystal fragments long-term. Everyone was going crazy over primordial crystal fragments right now. However, the situation didn't surprise Shifeng in the slightest. God's domain had very few items that could be used to nurture guild mounts, and most of these items hadn't yet been discovered. Now that players had learned about the primordial crystals, it would cause a massive commotion. Just before Shifeng reached the guild residence, Aqua Rose contacted him. Guild leader, the secret pavilion's Yuan Tiexin and his entourage have come to meet you. Apparently, he has something important he wishes to discuss with you. Would you like to meet with him now? Aqua Rose asked. The secret pavilion is looking for me? Shifeng could not help but smile upon hearing this. All right. Have them wait for me in the 2nd floor's reception room. I'll head there immediately. Although he knew that the primordial heart's appearance would cause quite a commotion, he hadn't expected it to move the secret pavilion. Shifeng disconnected the call and made his way to the residence's 2nd floor reception room. Chapter 1972, Joining the Chamber of Commerce Zero Wing's residence, 2nd floor reception room. As Shifeng entered the room, Yuan Tiexin and Purple Jade, who softly chatted on the sofa, stood to greet him. Both of them had already reached level 59, and although they had hidden their weapons and equipment's glow effects, Shifeng could tell that they carried extraordinary items based on the faint pressure he felt from the 2 players. Purple Jade in particular felt like a sharp, unsheathed blade. She also felt quite dynamic. So, this is a true genius? Shifeng was inwardly shocked when he saw Purple Jade. While he could not tell how much her basic attributes had improved, he could sense that Purple Jade had set foot in the realms of truth as someone who had done the same. The realms of truth were different from the realms of refinement. The realms of refinement only focused on improving one's physical control, whereas the realms of truth focused on the application of strength. While better control could reduce players' shortcomings and increase their latent potential, better application allowed players to utilize more of their potential. However, God's Domain's various large guilds didn't have a method of nurturing players in the realms of truth yet. Normally, players needed a wealth of combat experience and self-exploration to reach these realms. Even Shifeng had only accomplished the feat after many fortuitous encounters, yet despite receiving no guidance and having far less combat experience, Purple Jade had entered the realms of truth. Even the word genius was not sufficient to describe the young woman. Shifeng had spent plenty of time trying to guide Zero Wing's core upper echelons to these realms, but even now not one of them had succeeded. Meanwhile, when Purple Jade saw Shifeng entering the room, her eyes glowed with fighting spirit. A hint of reverence for the man before her also flashed in her eyes. Unbeknownst to Shifeng, she had only reached the realms of truth because of him. She had reached these realms recently and had only been able to do so after diligently studying Shifeng's numerous battles in the Ur Empire. Once she had entered the realms of truth, she had challenged and defeated multiple peak experts from the various superpowers. Guild Leader Black Flame, congratulations. Due to the battle in the Ice Jade Forest, Zero Wing's reputation nearly rivals the Dragon Phoenix Pavilions now. Yuan Tiexing congratulated as he watched Shifeng carefully. Thank you, Shifeng said. Revealing a faint smile, he continued, however, Elder Yuan, I'm sure you're not just here to congratulate Zero Wing, correct? Indeed, Yuan Tiexing replied as he revealed an envelope. After handing the envelope to Shifeng, he continued, this is a report regarding Blackwater and Beast Emperor's latest movements. I believe it will be of some help to Zero Wing. You're providing information for free? Shifeng looked at the envelope in confusion. He had to admit that both Blackwater and Beast Emperor posed a significant threat to his guild. Examining their latest movements would indeed help Zero Wing quite a bit, but information like this was incredibly important. Normally, the secret pavilion might not even consider selling the information to Zero Wing. That's right. Consider it a gift to celebrate the partnership between the secret pavilion and Zero Wing, Yuan Tiexing said. I believe you can guess the pavilion's goal in this. Naturally, we're interested in the primordial crystals. The primordial crystals are even more effective in nurturing guild mounts than the Eclipse Gate's energy essence. They're also much easier to procure. Meanwhile, Zero Wing owns the only guild city in Witch's Hill, so the secret pavilion wishes to cooperate with your guild. Yuan Tiexing's proclamation didn't surprise Shifeng. The primordial crystals were indeed an excellent item for nurturing guild mounts. He then asked, cooperation? May I know how we are going to cooperate? The secret pavilion wishes to invite the Candlelight trading firm into the secret chamber of commerce. As for the entry conditions, Zero Wing will only have to sacrifice 5 shops in different locations and a single virtual store in Zero Wing City. In addition, the secret chamber of commerce requires a permanent reservation of 300,000 entry slots into Zero Wing City, Yuan Tiexing said, chuckling. May I know if you are interested in this offer, Guild Leader Black Flame? Joining the secret chamber of commerce? When Yuan Tiexing finished speaking, Aqua Rose, who had accompanied Shifeng, was stunned, flashing the pavilion's representative an incredulous look. The secret pavilion was a transcendental power in the virtual gaming world. The strength it wielded was simply unfathomable. The secret chamber of commerce the pavilion had developed was similarly unfathomable, as very few chambers of commerce could rival Secret's range of influence. Needless to say, Secret was far more powerful than 7th Street. Without a doubt, Secret was one of the best chambers of commerce in God's domain right now. Many superpowers were desperate to join, but very few were actually invited into the alliance. Yet, the secret pavilion had visited Zero Wing City to invite the guild personally. Frankly, Aqua Rose didn't know what to say. If Zero Wing joined the secret chamber of commerce, the Candlelight trading firm's income could increase severalfold as long as the firm offered sufficiently attractive products. I'm curious, why Zero Wing? Shifeng asked the man before him. There are 2 other guild towns in the Witch's Hill, and both will soon be promoted to intermediate rank. If the secret pavilion gives the word, both ruling guilds will likely hand their towns over on a silver platter. Naturally, we have considered that option, but the Primordial Heart's descent has increased monsters' strength in the Witch's Hill. Monster raids also occur frequently at night. With the town's defenses, they'll have a hard time coping with the map's current monsters. Who knows how long they will last? However, Zero Wing City is different. Even if the Witch's Hill's monsters continue to grow stronger, Zero Wing City will likely remain unaffected. Moreover, Zero Wing City has an excellent environment, which will be of great help to the guild members we send here, Yuan Tiexin said. He withheld no information regarding the secret pavilion's reasons for selecting Zero Wing for a partnership. I see. Shi Feng could not help but admire the secret pavilion's information network and decisiveness. The primordial heart had only recently descended, so the monster's changes weren't yet obvious, yet the secret pavilion had already considered various possibilities. Shi Feng hadn't expected the pavilion to place so much importance in the primordial crystals that it would offer Zero Wing a seat in the secret chamber of commerce either. To protect both parties' interests, a guild would offer 1% of its shares when attempting to join a chamber of commerce. Hence, the various chambers of commerce took member recruitment very seriously. Guild leader Black Flame, if you are fine with these conditions, why don't we sign the contract now? Yuan Tiexin asked Shi Feng, who had maintained a calm composure throughout the conversation. Once we sign, Zero Wing's Candlelight trading firm will become a member of the secret chamber of commerce and enjoy all of the connections the alliance possesses. You will find it far easier to sell and buy items. Alright, I have no issues with the offer. Shi Feng had no problems with accepting the mentioned conditions, and joining the secret chamber of commerce would provide Zero Wing quite a bit of help, especially now that the guild lacked materials. The magic-breaking crossbows, hell tanks, and basic combat devices all required a large number of rare materials to produce. If Zero Wing relied on its own strength, it would only be able to collect a limited supply of each material, but with the secret chamber of commerce's connections, it could easily build its stockpile in a short time. After Shi Feng signed a contract with Yuan Tiexin, he handed over 5 shops and 1 virtual store in Zero Wing City. In addition, he reserved 300,000 entry slots in Zero Wing City for the secret pavilion's use. After all, a flood of players visited the city each day, and there was a limit to how many the city could accommodate at one time. If the secret pavilion did not have any reserve slots, its members would be forced to stand in line to enter Zero Wing City. Once the transaction was complete, the Candlelight trading firm joined the secret chamber of commerce's member list, and the two organizations exchanged 1% of their shares. Shortly after Candlelight joined the Chamber of Commerce, news of it quickly spread to the various superpowers. Chapter 1973, Guild Potential. As news about Zero Wing's Candlelight trading firm joining the secret Chamber of Commerce spread, a commotion erupted among the various superpowers in God's domain. What's going on? How did the secret Chamber of Commerce accept a guild like Zero Wing? Zero Wing really is impressive. It has already proven its strength to contend with a superpower, and now, it has even joined the secret chamber of commerce. The guild's financial strength will grow considerably now. As long as Zero Wing solidifies its foundations, it definitely has the potential to become a super first-rate guild. It seems that God's domain will soon have a new superpower. Send someone to investigate Zero Wing immediately. From today on, I want a team stationed in Zero Wing City. I want to know the guild's every move. Many superpowers had no power to join the secret pavilion's chamber of commerce regardless of how much they wanted to, yet a non-superpower like Zero Wing had done just that. This situation earned Zero Wing many superpowers' envy. In addition, this turn of events had forced the various superpowers to pay closer attention to Zero Wing. They no longer considered the smaller guild insignificant, but one with the potential to become a competitor. Sufficient financial strength was crucial to developing a guild in God's domain. Zero Wing might have repelled Miracle, but it had relied on various tools to do so. Meanwhile, as the various superpowers continued developing in God's domain, it was only a matter of time before they obtained such tools of their own. At that time, Zero Wing would lose its advantage. Hence, the various superpowers hadn't truly considered the guild a threat, but the situation had changed. The secret chamber of commerce was a goldmine. If a guild joined the trade alliance and utilized its connections appropriately, it would generate a massive income and secure a large number of resources. Even if the guild failed to take advantage of Secret's connections, it could still increase its trading firm's income by a large margin through service charges from helping the alliance's other members sell their products. This increased income would greatly help the guild's development, and these benefits would be available until the trade alliance crumbled. Meanwhile, on one of the islands in the Sea of Death. Big Sis Rain, big news? Zero Wing's Candlelight trading firm has joined the secret chamber of commerce. Blue Phoenix reported as she ran up to Phoenix Rain, who currently commanded a battle. Joined the secret chamber of commerce? Phoenix Rain blinked in surprise. How is that possible? So many superpowers have tried to join secret only to be rejected. Even Starlink only managed to join after purchasing the magic crystal vein at the secret pavilion's internal auction. It's true. News of this has already spread to the various superpowers. Everyone's saying that the secret pavilion has lost its mind to invite Zero Wing, Blue Phoenix said, grinning. Big Sis Rain, now that Zero Wing has joined secret, Nine Dragons Emperor won't be able to attack the guild's financials even if we don't help out. That's right. Even if Nine Dragons Emperor uses everything he has to stop Zero Wing's sales, he can't cut off secret's channels. Now we can focus on that large-scale team quest, Phoenix Rain said, nodding. She had nominated Zero Wing to 7th Street because she had been worried that she couldn't stop Nine Dragons Emperor from moving against her ally once she left the continent of God's domain. Now that Zero Wing had joined the secret chamber of commerce, which was even more powerful than 7th Street, the situation couldn't be any more favorable. Similarly, news had reached the various top chambers of commerce. Zero Wing seems to be quite capable. 7th Street rejected Zero Wing's conditions, yet the guild has joined secret? I wonder how 7th Street's members will feel after hearing about this? Zero Wing demanded less than half of what 7th Street required. There's nothing unusual about its refusal. As for Zero Wing's membership with secret, based on the chamber's focus on profits, I assume its entry conditions were quite strict. Most likely. The secret chamber of commerce's greed is insatiable. Zero Wing must have suffered quite a loss to join secret. While the various top chambers of commerce were surprised to hear that Zero Wing had joined the secret pavilion's chamber of commerce, they did not consider the matter that important after all. Zero Wing had no value in their opinions, nor did the guild have the support of any corporations. It was a miracle that the guild had risen to its current position without falling. Even if Zero Wing had a future in God's domain, it wouldn't be very bright. Since the secret pavilion had extended an invitation to Zero Wing, it must have demanded an absurd price. However, when the 7th Street Chamber of Commerce heard the news, its members simply smiled. They didn't share the other top chambers' opinions. Whether Zero Wing joined the secret chamber of commerce or not, it had nothing to do with them. They only knew that Zero Wing wouldn't have benefited their alliance even if it had joined. Zero Wing wouldn't benefit secret either. This incident was nothing but a farce. While God's domain's various powers discussed the matter, Shifeng had designated Aqua Rose and Melancholic Smile to handle matters regarding the secret chamber of commerce. He then led a team of 10,000 elite and expert players out of Zero Wing City and to the Witch's Hill's Forbidden Land. Zero Wing's members bounced with excitement during their journey. They got to see a mythical player like Shifeng up close, and he had even informed them that he would take them out to level up during their operation. This meant they would personally get to watch Shifeng fight. Once they returned, they'd definitely boast about the trip to their friends. But despite their enthusiasm, following Shifeng wasn't easy. The Primordial Heart's descent had drastically changed the Witch's Hill. Now, large groups of monsters were a common sight. Moreover, not only did these monsters possess powerful basic attributes, but they also used strangely impressive combat standards. They encountered a few powerful 100-man adventurer teams that these monsters had nearly wiped out along their journey. As for the 20-man teams they stumbled upon, they had tread very carefully through the area unless they had a tier 2 metric tons with them. The Witch's Hill was far more dangerous than anyone had expected. Only the various large guilds' 1,000-man teams barely succeeded near the border of the Witch's Hill's inner region. These guild teams did not dare to venture any farther. As for the teams that operated in the Witch's Hill's inner area, they were either expert teams from the various large guilds or 1,000-man teams from well-known adventurer teams. Only the teams of Tier 2 experts had any hope of surviving with 100 members. The monsters in the inner area were simply too powerful. Even the weakest monster was a level 61 chieftain, and the chieftains employed combat power that was on par with the late stage of the Trial Tower's second floor. Even an ordinary Tier 1 expert would die against such a monster in a one-on-one, not to mention ordinary players. However, despite entering the Witch's Hill's inner region, Shifeng showed no intention of letting his team fight here. Rather, he continued to lead his team deeper into the Witch's Hill. As Zero Wing's members followed their guild leader, they couldn't help their growing nerves. Although they had 10,000 elite and expert players, the majority of them had only reached Tier 1 and were level 55 or 56. The team's ordinary experts were only level 57, and the Tier 2 experts that accompanied them had only reached level 58. After following Shifeng's lead for more than 2 hours, these players arrived before a gravel-filled gorge. Not only did this area drown in a deathly aura, but it was also within the Witch's Hills core area. The weakest monster here was a level 65 chieftain, while most of these monsters were level 66 and 67 lords. There were also quite a few level 69 Grand Lords around the gorge. At first glance, the gorge contained tens of thousands of monsters, and all of them were far closer to each other than the inner region's monsters. Most importantly, a gigantic level 70 mythic monster lay in the center of the gorge. Chapter 1974, Sacred Leveling Ground. A mountainous scaled lizard lay in the center of the gorge, and a layer of poisonous green fog covered a 50-yard radius around it. No life survived within this fog, and even the earth seemed dry beneath it as if the fog had devoured the ground's very life force. Despite gazing at this lizard from afar, Zero Wings members couldn't help but shudder. A level 70 mythic monster. Aside from the fact that it was more than 10 levels higher than they were, the potent poisonous fog around it made the monster impossible to approach. In addition, its gigantic body, over 100 meters in length, could easily change the terrain with a casual move. A single claw swipe could likely eliminate dozens of them. They hadn't even reached level 60, but even if they were the same level as this monster, they'd likely be able to do little more than watch the giant lizard from afar. After all, the mythic lizard wasn't alone. Tens of thousands of Lord and Great Lord monsters lingered around the boss. To make matters worse, primordial gas filled the gorge. It would likely take a Tier 2 party of the same level to defeat any of these lords, while defeating each Great Lord would require a full Tier 2 20-man team. Even the guild's Tier 2 MTs, Kola, Turtledove, and Yi Wumian, felt uneasy as they watched the Forbidden Lands monsters, much less the team's elite members. With their current attributes and combat standards, they shouldn't have any issue tanking 1 or 2 level 67 or 68 Great Lords by themselves without activating a Berserk skill. They could even tank 1 level 69 Grand Lord, although they'd have to push their limits to do so. But more than 20 Grand Lords wandered the Forbidden Land, as well as plenty of Great Lords. If all these monsters charged at them together, only death would await these players. Guild leader, even Tier 2 players like us will have trouble grinding here. With a Tier 1 player's strength, I'm afraid that, Shadow Sword said worriedly as he eyed the gorge below him. Ignoring the mythic monster in the center, he could feel the threat of death from several other areas. If he felt like this while subjected to such pressure, the Tier 1 team members would fare far worse. It was safe to say that their team didn't have the power to grind in this Forbidden Land right now. If we try to grind these monsters as they currently are, it is impossible, but if we have their basic attributes and remove the primordial gas's negative effects? Shifeng asked, smiling. The Witch's Hills' new Forbidden Land wouldn't pose any threat to level 100+ players, but it was an immensely hazardous area to players who hadn't yet reached level 70. Of course, it was also a sacred area for leveling and grinding equipment. Since no one had explored the Forbidden Land yet, it contained the maximum number of monsters it could hold. However, that also meant that the area's drop rate and monster respawn rate were much higher than normal. Even if 10,000 players grinded in this Forbidden Land, there would be plenty of resources to go around. Unfortunately, transforming this hazardous area into a treasured land required players to fulfill one condition: they had to be strong enough to grind these monsters. A bunch of Tier 1 players that hadn't even reached level 70 would be seeking their own death by coming here, but they could change that with the Void Field. If they could decrease the monster's basic attributes by nearly half and remove the primordial gas's negative effects on players, even level 60, Tier 1 players could slay these creatures. Only their grinding efficiency would be quite poor. However, the bonus EXP from killing monsters of a higher level would even the playing field. Shifeng had led so many Zero Wing members to such a dangerous area specifically to help them level up quickly, as well as collect primordial crystal fragments. He might be a particularly powerful player in God's domain and capable of nurturing a significant number of experts in a short time, but at the end of the day, there was a limit to what a small number of powerful players could achieve. If he wanted Zero Wing to become truly formidable, he had to improve the strength of Zero Wing's members as a whole. Naturally, one of the ways players could grow stronger in God's domain was by leveling up. Every 5 levels was a major turning point in the game since better weapons and equipment would become available at those intervals. Hence, Shifeng had decided to raise his guild members' levels as quickly as possible. If he could help a large number of guild members reach level 60 within the next few days, it would elevate Zero Wing's overall strength. After all, even the various large guilds' peak experts had only recently reached level 59. They were still far from the level 60 threshold, and the various guilds' elite and expert members were even further. Have the monster's basic attributes and remove the primordial gases suppression? After considering Shifeng's comment, Shadow Sword deemed that grinding here would be possible if that were true. Even if their Tier 1 MTs couldn't tank these monsters, they could leave the task to the Tier 2 MTs, plenty of which had joined this expedition. But is that possible? Relax. I've prepared an item to do just that, Shifeng said as he retrieved the strengthened set of Void Field Magic Array scrolls from his bag. A magic array? But, with so many monsters, Shadow Sword roughly understood what Shifeng intended to do when he saw the stack of magic array scrolls, but with so many monsters around them, they'd need dozens or hundreds of arrays to cover the gorge. Wait a moment, you'll understand what I mean, Shifeng said. He then passed the Void Field scrolls to Alluring Summer and a few other magical class experts. Take these scrolls and activate them in these locations. Try to avoid any monsters while you activate the scrolls. Leave it to us. After examining the coordinates Shifeng had indicated, Alluring Summer and her companions went into action. Shifeng intended to activate the strengthened void field from halfway down the gorge. If they successfully activated the magic array there, it would cover nearly half of the area, giving Zero Wing's team enough room to fight. Once Alluring Summer and the other casters were in position, they unfurled the magic array scrolls and activated them. A gigantic silver magic array then manifested over nearly half of the Forbidden Land, enveloping every monster within range. Void Field then purified the primordial gas in the affected area, dissipating it. In addition, every monster rapidly lost basic attributes. Zero Wing's members were stunned. The Lord and Great Lord ranked monsters' attributes fell by 50%. Now they couldn't even compare to level 60 monsters of the same rank. The only advantages they still had were their combat standards and high level. MTs start pulling aggro. Fight in 100-man units. Do not enter each other's combat areas. Kola, you and the other Tier 2 MTs will tank the Grand Lords. Tier 1 MTs, you only need to handle the Lords and Great Lords. Shifeng commanded once the void field was complete. Following which, the 10,000 Zero Wing members quickly split into 100 teams of 100 players. These teams then split up and hit different areas in the Forbidden Land. Each team dealt with 3 to 5 Great Lords, and those with Tier 2 MTs handled at least one level 69 Grand Lord. Due to Void Field's power, the Forbidden Land's danger had significantly decreased. However, Zero Wing's members weren't able to deal much damage due to the level suppression. Even Tier 2 damage dealers barely dealt more than -10,000 with each attack. Even so, the region's monsters gradually lost HP. Normally, Zero Wing's 100-man elite teams could eliminate a party of Lords and Grand Lords of the same level in 10 minutes or less, but now, it took each team half an hour to defeat a party of monsters. However, as the Lords and Great Lords died, everyone's experience bars increased by a sizable chunk. After gaining an abundance of EXP, the teams regained their enthusiasm. All of the team's level 55 elite members reached level 56 after around 6 hours of grinding, while the level 56 elite players only needed a little more time to level up. At most, they'd need another 4 or 5 hours to reach level 57. Their leveling speed was nearly 5 times as fast as experts in other areas. However, these players were far more surprised by how much loot they gained than the awarded EXP. Chapter 1975, Level Increases. Zero Wing's members had fought in the Forbidden Land for 6 hours. The weakest foes they had slain had been chieftain rank, while most had been lords. Perhaps because they were the first to kill these monsters, the team had collected over 4,100 primordial crystals during their 6-hour grind. These fragments could fetch over 1,000 gold on the market, but only a fool would sell their primordial crystal fragments. With 10 fragments, one could synthesize a primordial crystal, which they could use to nurture their guild mounts. If one were lucky, they might even upgrade their guild mount to bronze rank after using 20 to 30 primordial crystals. The Forbidden Lands monsters had also dropped enough weapons and equipment to make these players' eyes glow. All of the dropped weapons and equipment were level 60 or above. The various large guilds had been expending a lot of effort to collect level 55 equipment lately. Raiding level 55 team dungeons wasn't as easy as level 50 dungeons, and unlike the latter in which Tier 1 players could still be effective, level 55 team dungeons had been tailored for Tier 2 players. Tier 1 players would simply be a burden in level 55 team dungeons. They'd only be useful if they wore extremely high-quality equipment. Hence, the various large guilds struggled desperately for level 55 weapons and equipment. Meanwhile, most of the equipment the Lords in the Witches' Hills Forbidden Land dropped was bronze rank. Although they had a small chance of dropping Mysterious Iron equipment naturally, the Great Lords dropped Mysterious Iron and Secret Silver equipment, with the latter having a severely lower drop rate. While Grand Lords were guaranteed to drop Secret Silver equipment, they did have a higher drop rate than Great Lords. They also had a slight chance of dropping Fine Gold equipment. Since Zero Wings members were the first to pioneer the Forbidden Land, there was an extremely high number of monsters in the area. Even the rarely seen Great Lords and Grand Lords were available in abundance right now. After just 6 hours of hard work, Zero Wings' 10,000-man team had obtained over a dozen pieces of level 60 Fine Gold equipment, over 100 pieces of level 60 Secret Silver equipment, and more than 1,000 Mysterious Iron and Bronze equipment pieces. Their operation had been quite lucrative. The team's latest harvest was already worth more than the strengthened Void Field Magic Array's production costs. Leveling up here is so fast. At this rate, I'll climb from 57 to 58 in less than a day. Grinding higher-leveled monsters is amazing. Our guild leader is still the best. He actually got his hands on such a powerful magic array. Once I reach level 60, I'll purchase some level 60 Mysterious Iron equipment and get rid of my outdated level 50 items. My friends will die from envy. That's right. A friend of mine that joined a super first-rate guild was recently boasting about how he had obtained level 55 Secret Silver equipment. Once I reach level 60, one can buy 2 or 3 pieces of level 60 Secret Silver equipment from the guild warehouse. The more Zero Wings members fought, the more enthusiastic they became. They showed no signs of fatigue. They all felt as if their struggle to level up had been a mere hallucination. At the same time, they were in awe of Shifeng's abilities. After experiencing the wonder of this leveling speed, Zero Wings players grinded with even more effort. They even took out and used their stockpiled exotic stamina potions to stay in battle as long as possible. Shifeng's team was far more energetic than he had expected. He had assumed that he'd need to use 2 more sets of normal Void Field Magic Array scrolls to get his team up to level 60, but watching these players' current leveling speed, he might only need 1 more set of Void Field scrolls. If that were the case, he could bring Zero Wing City's other elite and expert members here to level up as well. Time passed quickly. Whenever a player reached level 60, Shifeng would tell them to leave. If they had proven their strength, he'd instruct them to challenge their Tier 2 promotion quest. If they weren't strong enough, they were told to improve their equipment and techniques. To keep the team full, Shifeng had Aqua Rose send other guild members from Zero Wing City. After grinding for about 20 hours, several hundred of Zero Wing's Tier 1 experts had reached level 60. Once they traded Shifeng for level 60 Mysterious Iron or Secret Silver equipment, they left to challenge their Tier 2 promotion quests. Now, even the lowest-leveled elite member was level 56, while most of them were level 57. The majority of Zero Wing's Tier 1 experts were now level 59, with only a few stuck at level 58. The team's overall leveling speed was explosive. Grinding here proved far more effective than in 10 resource zones. Aqua Rose was immensely excited to see this. With the resources this Forbidden Land had to offer, Zero Wing could solidify its foundation and strength. In God's domain, every location had limited resources, and areas that could accommodate thousands of players, allowing them to level up rapidly, were incredibly rare. Generally, the various superpowers dominated these areas. After all, ordinary resource zones could only accommodate several hundred players at a time. If players flooded to a resource zone, leveling speed would decrease. It was easy to imagine how precious zones that could accommodate several thousand players were, yet this Forbidden Land easily served more than 10,000 players, and they all leveled at a phenomenal pace. If the various superpowers found out about this, their envy would know no bounds. Guild leader, we found 3 unknown alchemy recipes and an unknown stone tablet among the loot. Even an advanced appraisal can't identify them. Alluring Summer, who was busy collecting the various teams' loot, suddenly reported. Unknown alchemy recipes and an unknown stone tablet? Feng's lips curled into a smile as he considered a possibility. He then said, "Bring them to me." "Understood. I'll be right there." Alluring Summer said as she gave Feng's excited expression an odd look. She then ran toward his current location. Once Feng received the unknown recipes and tablet, he eagerly activated omniscient eyes to appraise the items. I was right. Feng was ecstatic as the items revealed their information. Of the 2 items Alluring Summer had collected, the alchemy recipes were none other than the resuscitation potion recipes. Only master alchemists and above could use these, and each recipe was worth thousands of gold. Countless players had ventured to the Witch's Hill's Forbidden Land to grind for these recipes, and even then they were unlikely to drop after a full day of grinding, yet Feng held 3 copies in his hands. He had to admit that the benefits of pioneering a Forbidden Land were truly wonderful. Not only were there plenty of monsters to kill, but items drop rates were much higher than usual. The unknown stone tablet, however, was even more valuable than the resuscitation potion recipes. If Alluring Summer hadn't mentioned the tablet, he would have forgotten that it had a chance of dropping here. The unknown tablet had been crafted from red luminary stone. It was an ancient god's secret key, an item that had been immensely famous throughout God's domain in the past. Normally this item only dropped in other worlds, but since the monsters in the Witch's Hill's Forbidden Land were from other worlds, it had a slight chance of dropping. Unfortunately, the secret key's drop rate was so minuscule that no one had ever thought of grinding for it here. But despite its abysmal drop rate, an ancient god's secret key had appeared. Chapter 1976, Ancient God's Secret Key. Feng could not help but grow a little excited as he looked at the red luminaire stone tablet in his hand. The ancient god's secret key was an extremely rare item in God's domain, even rivaling fragmented legendary items. However, the ancient god's secret key was different from fragmented legendary items. Fragmented legendary items could only be obtained by killing powerful bosses, completing epic or above quests, or opening epic or above treasure chests. Fortunately, the ancient god's secret key had a chance of dropping from monsters that resided in the various other worlds. Of course, the monsters had to be level 50 Great Lords or above. In the past, the various major powers had all sought an ancient god's secret key, but the drop rate was painfully low. Moreover, players' luck attribute wouldn't affect the drop rate, and as a result, regardless of how hard the various major powers grinded for this item, very few had actually obtained one. Guild leader, is it very valuable? Alluring Summer asked when she saw Feng's excited expression. Of course. It is extremely valuable. Feng nodded. You could say that it's just as valuable as an epic treasure chest. An epic treasure chest? When Alluring Summer heard Feng's claim, her eyes glowed as she gazed at the ancient god's secret key. An epic treasure chest had a very high chance of yielding epic items. Thus, they were undoubtedly precious to the various large guilds. Most guilds only had a small number of epic items at this stage of the game, and only the guild's upper echelons or peak experts qualified to use them. Even in Zero Wing, epic items were extremely rare. In total, Zero Wing had less than 100 epic items, and that was already enough to attract the various first-rate guilds' jealousy. However, we can't use this key yet. We need to be strong enough to obtain an epic item. Otherwise, we will simply waste the ancient god's secret key, Feng said as he stored the key away. He had no intention of using the key right now. Instead, he commanded Zero Wing's members to move deeper into the Forbidden Land and grind its numerous field bosses. The ancient god's secret key was akin to an epic treasure chest, but unlike a treasure chest, players had to rely on their strength to obtain the key's harvest, not luck. Meanwhile, the greater one's survivability was, the more they'd gain from the ancient god's secret key. There had even been rumors in the past about a superpower obtaining a fragmented legendary item from the secret key. With a single fragmented legendary item, a guild could easily nurture a peak expert. It would even have even greater help when players challenged their Tier 4 and 5 promotion quests. That was why all of the various major powers had coveted the ancient god's secret key. Fragmented legendary items were extraordinarily valuable, and even after a decade in God's domain, first-rate guilds had only collected a small number of them. Second-rate guilds had been lucky if they had 1 or 2 fragmented legendary items. Now that he had an ancient god's secret key, he had to be careful with how he used it. Of course, Feng had no intention of letting it sit around and collect dust. Each secret key had a 1-week expiration. Whether players used it or not, it would disappear after 7 days, so it wasn't possible to save the key until it was most valuable. Shi Feng then handed the 3 resuscitation potion recipes to Aqua Rose, instructing her to bring them to Melancholic Smile and start the potion's production as soon as possible. The potion's necessary materials weren't particularly valuable. There had only been such a small supply of these potions in the past, despite the high demand, due to the recipe's rarity. God's domain superpowers had yet to obtain a resuscitation potion recipe, making this the perfect opportunity for Zero Wing to make a fortune. Once the various superpowers secured the recipes, though, Zero Wing's profits through the potion would plummet. It was the same case with the strengthening devices. Initially, Zero Wing had earned quite a bit from selling the devices, but as more superpowers and first-rate guilds had obtained the strengthening device design, the competition had increased. As a result, Zero Wing's profits from the device had steadily decreased. Since the resuscitation potion didn't exist on the market yet, Zero Wing could monopolize the potion's sales. Zero Wing wasn't like the various superpowers. Not only did the various superpowers have a lot of territory in the game, but they also had support from major corporations. Superpowers didn't have to worry about resources or funds since the corporations backing them provided a constant supply. However, Zero Wing didn't have that kind of support, relying on its own power to acquire funds and resources. Unfortunately, developing a guild's territory and increasing member count required a lot of both. This was especially true for the situation in the Orc Empire. While Zero Wing had been preoccupied with Miracle, according to the Secret Pavilion's report, Blackwater had made significant progress in raiding the Orc capital city's armory, obtaining quite a few war weapons. In addition, the guild had recently occupied another fortress in the Orc Empire. Due to this success, Blackwater had transferred even more members from its main headquarters to the Orc Empire. Moreover, Beast Emperor, Blackwater, and Dark Soul had secretly formed an alliance and intended to take over the Orc Empire. Annihilating Zero Wing was the first step in their plan. The alliance between these 3 powers wasn't good news for Zero Wing. Most importantly, unlike Blackwater and Dark Soul, Beast Emperor and Zero Wing were irreconcilable enemies. Shi Feng had severed Beast Emperor's path to promotion, and an active evil god's temple still existed within Starmoon Kingdom. So long as these 2 factors continued, only one could survive the war between Zero Wing and Beast Emperor. Hence, Shi Feng needed to prepare for this eventuality. Silverwing couldn't withstand a joint assault from these 3 powers with its current defenses. After organizing the rest of the loot, Shi Feng continued to lead Zero Wing's members as they gradually cleared out the monsters in the Forbidden Lands outer region, venturing farther towards its core. Although the Forbidden Lands outer region was home to a lot of monsters, the strongest in the area were Grand Lords. With Void Field suppression, Zero Wing easily took care of these monsters, and although they would respawn after some time, there weren't as many as there had been initially. Once they had limited the population, level 60 Tier 2 experts would have no problems grinding these monsters efficiently, even without the Void Field. Zero Wing's players would be fine as long as they didn't provoke the Grand Lords. As the team reached the Forbidden Lands inner region, their gazes settled on a gigantic, scaled lizard. Void Lizard, Void Creature, Mythic Rank. Level 70. HP 600, 000, 000/600, 000, 000. Shi Feng had formed a 1,000-man team to raid the Void Lizard, over 600 of which were Tier 2 players, and the lowest leveled among them was level 60. Once everyone was in position, Shi Feng had Cola, now level 61, begin the raid. If they had to face the Void Lizard under normal conditions, Shi Feng would have kept his players as far from the mythic boss as possible. Level 60 players had no hope of taking down a level 70 mythic monster, and even a Tier 2 metric tons like Cola would only be able to tank the boss if he activated his Berserk skill. However, they didn't have to fight under normal circumstances. The strengthened Void Field was still in effect, and the Void Lizard's basic attributes had decreased by 20%. In addition, Shi Feng had 9 members of the team utilize the 9 stars Polar Domain Magic Array to suppress the Void Lizard further, ensuring that the boss only retained 70% of its basic attributes. With it this weak, even Cola could tank the Void Lizard without a Berserk skill, albeit barely. Unfortunately, the team wasn't able to deal much damage to the boss due to the level suppression. Even among the Tier 2 damage dealers, very few dealt more than -10,000 damage. However, with players like Shi Feng and Zero Wing's core upper echelons, all of whom had monstrous attributes, the team's total DPS exceeded the Void Lizard's battle recovery, steadily whittling away the mythic monster's HP. 90%, 60%, 30%. When the Void Lizard had 30% of its HP remaining, the boss went berserk. In response, Shifeng ordered his team to activate their berserk skills to endure the Void Lizard's berserk period. After more than an hour, the team eventually defeated the mythic boss. As the Void Lizard died, everyone on the 1,000-man team received an abundance of EXP. Cola and a few other level 61 players instantly rose to level 62, and the other tier 2 players watched their experience bars increase by a sizable chunk. As for Shifeng, a golden glow enveloped his body as he climbed from 69 to 70. Chapter 1977, Tier 2 Training. Seeing the collapsed Void Lizard, Zero Wing's 1,000-man raid team breathed a sigh of relief, joy surfacing on their expressions. The bountiful EXP the mythic monster had granted wasn't the only reason for their joy, they also celebrated the loot the boss had dropped. The dazzling mountain that had appeared beside the monster's colossal body made every member of the raid team drool. At first glance, there were easily more than 50 items in the pile. Over a dozen among them were weapons and equipment that had the glow of fine gold and dark gold items. However, the only item in the small mountain of loot that caught Shifeng's eye was the bottle of void blood. With this, he could craft a few more sets of void field scrolls. As for the remaining items, the most valuable was the resuscitation potion recipe. In Shifeng's opinion, the level 60 fine gold and dark gold weapons and equipment were average at best. The best piece of equipment that had dropped was the void shoes, a set of epic ranked cloth armor boots. Shifeng instantly handed the void shoes to Violet Cloud, increasing her epic item count to 5. With Death's Sigh, Violet Cloud could now easily contend with peak experts. "I'm beat," Cola complained as he let his body fall to the ground. "I never thought that fighting a higher-leveled mythic monster would cost so much stamina. Had the boss lasted any longer, I would have died from exhaustion." Compared to fighting the Void Lizard, the Grand Lords he had faced earlier were child's play. The Void Lizard had lasted more than an hour, and he had stayed on high alert throughout the fight due to the boss's high combat standard. If he had made the slightest mistake, he would have taken a direct hit, and he had no doubt that one hit would have been enough to end his life instantly. Fighting the Void Lizard was more mentally exhausting than grinding monsters for 10 hours without a break. Cola had lost stamina at a severe rate, and although the system didn't provide an indicator for stamina, Cola guessed that he had less than 20% remaining based on how tired he felt. Had the raid continued for any longer and his stamina fallen below 10%, he would receive a penalty to his combat power. He wouldn't have been able to keep up with the Void Lizard's attacks, and it definitely would have instant-killed him. Turtledove and Yi Wumian, who also rested on the ground, nodded in agreement. Fighting a mythic monster that was 10 levels higher than they were was truly exhausting. In fact, this raid had been even more intense than raiding the Void Serpent. Cola and the other Tier 2 MTs weren't the only ones exhausted. Everyone that participated in the raid practically had less than 30% stamina remaining. Only Shifeng didn't seem tired as he moved towards the pile of loot that had manifested beside the boss's feet. Every Zero Wing member was shocked. Shifeng had fought on the front line during the entire raid. His total damage output had also topped the raid chart, exceeding second place by more than double. Occasionally he had even helped the MT's tank. Shifeng should have used more stamina than anyone in the raid, yet he looked as if he had done nothing but watch. Fire Dance, who had come in second for damage dealt, was drenched in sweat, clearly just as exhausted as the MTs. Is the guild leader a monster? He's not even tired after such a long, arduous battle? Zero Wing's Tier 2 experts were confused as they watched Shifeng collect the loot. They were all Tier 2. Logically, there should not be much of a difference between their total stamina, and Shifeng had fought far harder than they had, yet they were nearly out of stamina. That's normal. You guys made too many excess movements during the fight. Most importantly, you guys haven't adapted to the flow of battle, allowing you to fight at peak condition constantly. It is only natural that you run out of gas more quickly. Shifeng could not help but laugh when he overheard his teammates' conversation. In truth, he was just as surprised by how much stamina he still had. He had never expected the added benefit after reaching the realms of truth. "Guild leader, do you have any training methods?" Cola asked, desire flashing in his eyes. Although Kola had reached the refinement realm and could reduce his stamina consumption during fights a little, he was still leaps and bounds behind Shifeng. He even wondered if Shifeng had twice the stamina he had. Stamina was extremely important to expert players. If he could learn a technique that allowed him to reduce stamina consumption, he could rely on his stamina to whittle down an expert of equal standards in a fight. After all, fighting an expert player consumes stamina much faster than fighting a boss monster. Such a technique would be of great help whether he fought boss monsters or expert players in the future. Training, is it? Upon hearing Kola's question, Shifeng realized how important it was to train his team in stamina control. Although controlling one's stamina wouldn't improve their combat power, it would have a massive impact on the player's performance. When grinding in the fields, players' grinding efficiency was largely dependent on their stamina. If players had various tools to aid in their stamina recovery, they could increase their grinding efficiency. However, such tools were very rare and valuable. Players simply couldn't afford to use them constantly. However, if players entered the realms of truth, not only could they increase their combat power, but they could also increase their leveling speed. After all, the lower one's stamina consumption was, the longer they could fight. Thinking up to this point, Shifeng decided that it was time to train Fire Dance and the others in the Lost Town. Since the guild had lacked powerful combatants previously, Tier 2 players like Fire Dance didn't have the leeway to leave the front line, but now that Zero Wing had more than 1,000 Tier 2 players, Fire Dance and her companions could afford a break. Furthermore, the difference in the equipment standard of the various superpowers peak experts and Zero Wing's core upper echelons shrunk as time passed. The various superpowers continued to collect more epic items, and most of their peak experts had obtained peak legacies. If Zero Wing wanted to maintain its lead on the various superpowers in terms of peak combatants, it was imperative that Fire Dance and the others grow stronger. The only reliable method Shifeng could think of to increase Fire Dance and her companions' combat power was to train at the Lost Town's Extraordinary Tower. If Fire Dance and the others could reach the realms of truth, they could help the guild even more than they already did. In a situation where two players had equal basic attributes, a refinement realm expert that had entered the realms of truth as well could rival a flowing water realm expert in terms of combat power, and the former would have even better control of their abilities. Aqua, notify our main force members and have them gather in White River City's residence in 2 hours. We're going to participate in special stamina training. Shifeng addressed Aqua Rose. Stamina training? I'll notify them right away. Aqua Rose was ecstatic to hear Shifeng's latest order. However, after giving the matter some more thought, she could not help but ask, Guild Leader, since we're participating in special training, why don't we include the guild's other experts as well? I don't want too many people to know about this training method yet. Moreover, the guild has many affairs that require Tier 2 experts to manage. Taking too many people at once isn't ideal, Shifeng said, shaking his head. The Lost Town was a specialized training ground for the realms of truth. Its value was immeasurable. If the various superpowers found out about it, they would do everything in their power to take it from him. Hence, he had used the excuse of stamina training. If too many people found out about his Lost Town, it would increase the chances of the secret getting out, and he couldn't afford for that to happen. Zero Wing didn't have the ability to defend the town properly yet. Shifeng didn't have to say more for Aqua Rose to understand what he was trying to say. She stopped asking questions and contacted the guild's main force members. Following which, Shifeng held an internal auction for the weapons and equipment the Void Lizard had dropped. He then left the 2 remaining sets of Void Field Scrolls with Yu Zipping and had him and the other Tier 2 internal members take charge of the grinding operation in the Forbidden Land. As long as they didn't provoke any mythic bosses, they wouldn't have any issues in the Forbidden Land with the Void Field's assistance. Once Shifeng had finished designating tasks, he left the Forbidden Land, pulling out a return scroll to teleport to White River City once teleportation was available again. Chapter 1978, Reputation Soars. Star Moon Kingdom, White River City. How lively. When Shifeng exited the teleportation hall, he was greeted by the sight of a crowded street. Merchant players were busy conducting business along the street, and impromptu teams recruited members for their dungeon raids. These impromptu teams were all quite strong, with at least level 56 members. Some teams even had the leadership of Tier 2 players. At this stage of the game, such impromptu teams were considered incredibly powerful. These teams in other cities were usually led by Tier 1 experts. Very few had Tier 2 experts. Feng also spotted quite a few adventurer teams recruiting members, all of which were extremely powerful with more than 10 Tier 2 experts on average. Even a few well-known adventurer teams had come to White River City from other kingdoms. Most of the players on the street were high-leveled and well-equipped. In fact, level 57 expert players were a common sight, and there were many independent players wearing multiple pieces of level 50 secret silver equipment. At this point, White River City's prosperity actually surpassed Star Moon City. It looked nothing like an ordinary major NPC city, having developed far more than Feng had expected. Zero Wing is amazing. Not only did it repel Miracle in the Black Dragon Empire, but I've also heard that it has recently joined the Secret Chamber of Commerce. I'm definitely going to sign up for Zero Wing's mass recruitment. I've heard the same. And so many well-known adventurer teams have come to White River City to join the guild. Even if Zero Wing rejects their application, they're willing to work as subordinate adventurer teams for the guild. Because of this, White River City has seen a drastic increase in player traffic. I know, right? Although the resources around White River City aren't anything special, the city has a direct route to the Eclipse Gate, and that area has fairly abundant resources. Even if we don't make it into Zero Wing this time, it's not a bad idea to develop here. Furthermore, White River City is Zero Wing's main headquarters. When the guild recruits members in the future, we'll have a far better chance of joining the guild if we stay here. As Feng walked through the streets, he heard many excited conversations regarding his guild. Although Zero Wing had displayed immense strength, it still lacked a powerful background and funding. It was a guild that relied on its own power to survive. Because of that, not many players and adventurer teams had optimistic views of Zero Wing's prospects. But now, the guild had also joined the Secret Chamber of Commerce. Even without the support of a major corporation, Zero Wing wouldn't have to worry about funding in the future with Secret's connections. It even had a high chance of becoming a super first-rate guild in the future. This presented a golden opportunity for adventurer teams and expert players. Existing super first-rate guilds and super guilds already had well-developed structures. They had also filled most of their available management positions. Climbing the corporate ladder would be extremely difficult for newcomers. Even geniuses would need a long time to reach a significant position. However, Zero Wing was different. The guild wasn't yet stable, and its foundations had various holes and lacked talented players. However, now that Zero Wing had a hope of becoming a superpower, a player had a chance of becoming an upper echelon as long as they joined the guild and performed well. Becoming the upper echelon in a super first-rate guild was much faster than trying to climb the corporate ladder in an already established super first-rate guild. With such an opportunity before them, how could players and adventurer teams ignore this chance? This was the reason that White River City had become the focal point of Star Moon Kingdom. Large numbers of independent players and well-known adventurer teams swarmed the city, instantly pushing White River City's player population past 10 million. Moreover, these players' quality surpassed that of other kingdoms' capital cities. When Feng reached the city's Candlelight trading firm, he discovered that the guild residence wasn't the only busy area. Candlelight bustled with activity, and Liang Jing was busy reviewing the long line of lifestyle players standing near the shop's entrance. The line outside of the shop extended from one end of the street to the other. Moreover, the standards of these applying lifestyle players were considerably high. The weakest applicant was a basic lifestyle player, not a single apprentice stood in line. There were also plenty of advanced lifestyle players waiting for their review. The scene stupefied the independent players that had just arrived in the city, and when other guilds members saw this, their eyes nearly fell from their sockets. All of the various large guilds offered incentives to recruit advanced lifestyle players, but very few usually took the bait, yet more than 100 of these players had eagerly applied to the Candlelight trading firm, obediently waiting in line. The news certainly spread quickly. Feng was a little surprised by the thousands of lifestyle players applying to join Zero Wing. He had to admit that joining a top chamber of commerce had its benefits. He hadn't expected Secret's reputation to be so useful. Candlelight hadn't officially started working with Secret, yet so many lifestyle players had rushed to join Zero Wing. By the time Candlelight collaborated with Secret and started to sell products through the chamber's channels, he'd likely see several times more players trying to join his trading firm. Feng could relate to a certain degree. Although the former Candlelight trading firm had solid foundations and superb talent nurturing capabilities, it hadn't had enough channels to sell its products. Now that Candlelight had both, lifestyle players considered it the best place to develop. Following which, Shifeng headed to one of Candlelight's special workshops and handed a resuscitation potion recipe to Silent Wonder, leaving it to the chief alchemist to decide who should learn the recipe. He then visited his own special forging room and started to craft more void field magic arrays. After a little over an hour, Shifeng had completed 5 sets of void field scrolls out of 8 attempts. These 5 sets would enable many of Zero Wing's elite and expert players to grind in the Witch's Hill's Forbidden Land. Then, even without the void field, they could simply return to grinding in the Forbidden Land's outer region. Now that the area's monsters had died more than a few times, the respawn rate had decreased. Even the ordinary Tier 2 experts should have no problem helping the Tier 1 players grind there. Once Shifeng had settled his affairs in Candlelight, he made his way to Zero Wing's residence. Currently, Blackie and the other main force members sat in the residence's second-floor hall. They had been waiting for quite some time, and they all looked forward to the special stamina training. One's combat standard was the basis for their combat power, and the more they fought expert players, the more this idea proved to be true. They used to overwhelm their opponents with their basic attributes, but as players progressed in the game, their advantage continued to lessen. "Commander, we really lucked out this time. We've just joined the guild's main force, yet we get to partake in special internal training. I wonder what the guild leader has to teach us?" Seven Light, a young Tier 2 swordsman, spoke excitedly to the middle-aged man beside him. "I've already told you that I'm no longer Unbounded's commander. In the future, refer to me as Brother Bone," Stubborn Bone told the youth beside him, exasperated. "But you're right, we've really gotten lucky this time. We actually get to train under Black Flame personally. I assume he'll teach us some kind of footwork or body technique." Every large guild had its own internal training programs. Some programs taught combat techniques that were exclusive to the guild, and others provided lectures. Stubborn Bone, though, was confident that this training session would involve learning a combat technique through practice. After all, Zero Wing was famous for its many techniques. Quite a few other players in the group were former adventurer team members as well. For example, Remnant Cloud and Graceful Moon, the prior commander and vice-commander of the Firecloud Fox adventurer team, were also present. These former adventurers were all curious about what Shifeng had in store for them. "Everyone has gathered, guild leader," Aqua Rose reported when she noticed Shifeng enter the hall. "Good. Let's set off then." Shifeng nodded. He then led the team to the residence's first underground floor. Chapter 1979, Visiting the Extraordinary Tower again. First underground floor in Zero Wing's residence. Under Shifeng's lead, the group arrived before a strictly guarded room. 10 personal guards stood at the entrance. Zero Wing's main force members were shocked to see the personal guards. These NPCs were all level 75 or above, and the team was familiar with 2 of them, both Secret Silver personal guards. Even superpowers coveted such top-tier guards. Of the 2 Secret Silver personal guards, the level 76, Tier 2 Summoner was Aqua Rose's personal guard, while the level 76, Tier 2 Magic Knight belonged to Fire Dance. It had caused quite a commotion when the 2 women had obtained them. Although Secret Silver personal guards weren't strong enough to fight opponents of a higher tier like Shifeng's Anna and Kite, they could still rival Tier 3 NPCs of the same level. Not even a level 75 Tier 2 Peak Expert would be a match for these guards. As for current level 60 Peak Experts, they'd only have a hope of defeating the personal guards if they fought in a large team. Yet, 2 of these personal guards had been tasked with guarding this room. Based on the other guards' auras and levels, it was safe to assume that they were at least Mysterious Iron rank. At this stage of the game, even a first-rate guild's upper echelons only employed Mysterious Iron personal guards. Secret Silver personal guards were simply too rare, even rarer than epic items. Meanwhile, the various large guilds and superpowers typically used Secret Silver personal guards to protect their guild warehouses, yet 2 of these NPCs defended a mere room. Why wouldn't this surprise the team members? However, these players' shock reached new heights as they entered the room. The room was incredibly small, and one would be hard-pressed to fit 100 people within. Only a magic array occupied the room, carved into the floor in the center. It didn't seem like a place that warranted Secret Silver personal guards' protection. Shifeng could not help but smile when he saw his team's confusion, but he didn't bother to explain the situation. Under Shifeng's commands, the team then split into groups of 10. Everyone step in the magic array, Shifeng said as he did just that. Once everyone was in place, Shifeng inserted a magic crystal before a white flash enveloped him and the 9 members of his group. They vanished. The rest of Zero Wing's main force members finally understood what the magic array was for. They then entered the magic array and mimicked Shifeng's actions, one party after another. When they reopened their eyes, they found themselves in a foreign town. It was one other than the Lost Town, located in the Boneless Land. The Lost Town was no longer the desolate, abandoned place it had been. Dilapidated buildings had once dotted the area, and not a single NPC could have been found in the town. But while the town wasn't teeming with NPCs, dozens wandered along the main street now. Similarly, renovated shops, restaurants, and hotels now filled the town. The Lost Town now looked like any typical NPC border town. However, unlike NPC towns, several ancient, imposing buildings remained. Ancient divine runes and images had been carved into these buildings' walls, and among them, the most eye-catching was the square, white tower in the town's center. A pitch-black orb hovered at the tower's peak, radiating a frightening aura that deterred anyone from casually approaching. Yet, the most important thing Zero Wing's members noticed was the town's mana density. The mana here was no less dense than in Stone Forest Town, and it felt even denser as one approached the White Tower. The mana around the strange tower could even rival that of Silver Wing Town. Amazing. Where are we? Guild leader, are we training here? Everyone turned to Shifeng after observing the town for a moment. Even Aqua Rose and the other upper echelons were stunned. They all wondered when Shifeng had gotten his hands on such a wondrous place. Setting aside the town's leveling environment, its high mana density made the town incredibly valuable. This is the Lost Town. It also belongs to Zero Wing. Unfortunately, the town still lacks facilities, so I haven't opened it to the public, Shifeng said, chuckling. He gestured to the White Tower and said, "That tower will be your training venue." Although the guild members he had led here were all Zero Wing's main force members, none of them had known about the Lost Town before today. After all, Shifeng hadn't told anyone about it. Even the internal members he had power-leveled in the Boneless Land hadn't known that Zero Wing had secured the Lost Town. They had only known that a dangerous town existed in the Boneless Land. He hadn't kept this secret because he was overly cautious, but because the Lost Town's value warranted such caution. Even after 10 years in God's domain, he had never heard of a town or place that could train players to reach and progress in the realms of truth, and this training system had been designed by the main God system. It was far more accurate and refined than the training systems the various superpowers had designed. Hence, he couldn't afford to reveal this secret to the world. If news about the Lost Town's ability leaked, Zero Wing would instantly become public enemy number 1. The various superpowers definitely wouldn't let Zero Wing off the hook. However, to increase the strength of Zero Wing's experts as quickly as possible and nurture more experts that could contend with peak experts, he had no choice but to take this risk. As players progressed in the game and reached higher levels, Zero Wing would continue to lose its advantages. The moment that Zero Wing fell behind, its enemies would strike. Shifeng had another reason for leading his main force to the Lost Town as well. Now that Zero Wing had solved the issue of its magic crystal shortage, he could afford to operate the extraordinary tower every day. We're training in there? Zero Wing's players looked at the tower, a little disappointed. Does it have advanced combat rooms? None of them showed any interest in training in a venue the main God system had created. They had already experienced such training systems before. One such example was the Divine Colosseum's Trial Tower. The Trial Tower held absolute authority over God's domain's players. Not only could they test their strength in the Trial Tower, but they could also use it to discover their flaws and improve themselves. They assumed the tower before them was similar to the Trial Tower. Unfortunately, the Trial Tower only offered minor assistance at this point. It was unlikely that this White Tower, which looked far less impressive than the Trial Tower, would provide better training. Not interested? Shifeng could not help the smile pulling at his lips when he noticed the team's lack of enthusiasm. How about this? If any of you manage to get past the first floor within 1 week, I'll reward you with a bloodline that will improve your life rating. A bloodline? Guild leader, are you for real? Shadow Sword and the others' excitement returned. They had all heard of bloodlines, and many of them had taken part in the Demon King raid on Kama Island. They had seen the space-time bloodline that the Demon King had dropped. There was no doubt that the bloodline was a super powerful item, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to call it a free pass to Tier 3. It could even help players when they challenged their Tier 4 promotion quests. Of course. Shifeng nodded. However, you have to clear the first floor within a week. The tower's first floor? Shouldn't that be a piece of cake? Zero Wings players then dashed towards the extraordinary tower, more than eager to get to work. Shifeng, however, casually entered the tower and headed for the top floor. He then called up the extraordinary tower system interface and released the second floor's seal. This was the reason he had come to the Lost Town today. Chapter 1980, Second Floor Unsealed. The moment Shifeng chose to remove the seal on the extraordinary tower's second floor, he instantly lost 100,000 of the 110,000 magic crystals he had recently collected. The divine runes on the extraordinary tower's exterior then lit up with a steady, colorful brilliance. Mana flooded toward the tower from far beyond the Lost Town's boundaries, rapidly increasing the town's mana density. After several seconds of this, the Lost Town's mana density was even higher than in Silverwing Town, and after a few more seconds, it could rival the density in Zero Wing GD. Everyone within the extraordinary tower felt the change. Due to the increased mana density, the players within the tower received a well-rested buff, indicating that they could accumulate 15% of the double EXP buff after resting in the Lost Town for 48 hours. Sure enough, this extraordinary tower is really amazing. Shifeng was slightly surprised at how dense the mana had become. The mana density within the tower was at least 20% higher than in Zero Wing City. This meant that players would recover their stamina and concentration 20% faster inside the extraordinary tower than they would in the city. Even if players practiced advanced combat techniques, they could train continuously at an adequate pace in such a mana-rich environment. To God's Domain's expert players, training here was the ultimate dream. If Zero Wing offered such a precious training ground for lease, the various superpowers would likely form a long line for a chance to rent it, since mastery of an advanced combat technique would provide their players with a huge boost in combat power. Refinement Realm experts would be able to challenge Flowing Water Realm experts, and Flowing Water Realm experts would be able to challenge Void Realm experts. However, advanced combat techniques were not easy to master. Executing such techniques consumed a lot of stamina and concentration. Meanwhile, players' regeneration of stamina and concentration was normally extremely slow. Hence, players could practice their advanced combat techniques for only a very limited number of times each day, yet mastery of advanced combat techniques required a lot of practice. Thus, the higher mana density inside the tower was a great boon. Shortly after Shifeng released the seal on the extraordinary tower's second floor, the divine runes and magic arrays carved on the inner walls lit up as well. Unfortunately, if he wanted to use the second floor's training system, he'd have to pay 5,000 magic crystals per day. Even a first-rate guild could afford such an expense for only a few days. The manatite vein Zero Wing had recently acquired was the only reason Shifeng dared to activate the second floor now. Despite the guild's recent expansions, Zero Wing would still have nearly 20,000 extra magic crystals after daily expenses. Hence, the guild could afford to maintain the second floor's operation. Shifeng then left the top floor and prepared to face the second floor challenge. Although he had comprehended the realms of truth's principles and had mastered the truth realm to reach the ascension realm, he had relied on his personal understanding to accomplish these feats. He hadn't received any official training or guidance, but now that the system's specialized training for the realms of truth was before him, he had to put it to good use. Furthermore, he had to prepare for using the ancient god's secret key he had obtained. Obtaining an ancient god's secret key was incredibly difficult. Who knew when he would find another one? If he wished to maximize the secret key's value, he'd have to grow as strong as possible. He'd be able to secure better items from the secret key only with better survivability. As Shifeng descended the staircase to the extraordinary tower's first-floor training ground, he noticed that it had implemented a similar system to that which had stopped players from entering the tower before he had taken ownership of the town. Players on the first floor were required to approach a magic array in the center. On their way there, the tower bombarded the players with various attacks. Although the attacks didn't cause any damage, they only repelled the players. The only difference between the first floor training ground and the initial defense mechanism was the attack pattern they used. When Shifeng had found the extraordinary tower and tried to enter, he had faced only head-on attacks. However, in this training ground, players were attacked from every direction. Of course, players couldn't use any skills or spells. They had to rely on their own abilities to reach the center of the room. Fire Dance and her companions were moving towards the central magic array, but no matter how they tried to contend with the incoming attacks, the result was the same. None of them could get within 100 yards of the array. The training ground's radius was only 200 yards, yet no one could cross half this distance. Even Violet Cloud and Fire Dance, who were both close to reaching the flowing water realm, barely crossed the 60-yard mark. The best among the other refinement realm experts could reach only the 50-yard mark. As for non-refinement realm experts like Remnant Cloud and Stubborn Bone, they couldn't even make it to 30 yards. The first floor training ground was far more difficult than the Extraordinary Tower's defense mechanism. Guild leader, this place is amazing. We already have to face more than a dozen head-on attacks before we reach the 10-yard mark. The attacks are so fast too. Unlike players' and monsters' attacks, these attacks seem to appear and disappear abruptly. It's impossible to predict the attack trajectories and dodge. And that's not even the best part. Once we cross the 10-yard mark, we're attacked from all directions. No human can stop these attacks. That's right. Not only do the attacks come from every direction, but you have to deal with more attacks as you move forward. When you reach the 50-yard mark, the attacks even change their trajectories without warning. And the further you progress, the more the attacks change. These transformations are so frustrating. Even Big Sis Fire got defeated shortly after crossing the 60-yard mark. When Zero Wings players noticed Shifeng's approach, they burst into a round of enthusiastic comments. Despite their slow progress, they were all immensely excited, feeling as if the doors to a whole new world had just opened up before them. They were all experts that had joined Zero Wings' main force. Even the weakest among them was close to the half-step refinement realm standard, and many of them had mastered multiple combat techniques. Even so, they felt like infants learning to walk when they faced the training grounds trial, able to apply only a tiny fraction of their knowledge and combat experience. This was especially true for people like Remnant Cloud and Stubborn Bone, who had just joined Zero Wing's main force. They had never imagined that Zero Wing had found such an awe-inspiring training ground. They all felt as if they were learning something even more amazing than combat techniques. As they continued to challenge the trial, their reactions and ability to make instant judgments improved. However, they knew that they couldn't rely on these improvements to pass this trial. They needed to ingrain the appropriate reactions and the attack's transformations in their minds until they could react instinctively. It felt as if this trial were trying to engrave a complete set of basic combat techniques into their bones, enabling them to execute a technique with every movement. It seems you all have gained a significant harvest. I hope some of you break through the first floor's training ground in 1 week. I'll be waiting on the second floor, Shifeng said, chuckling. He then headed for the magic array at the center of the training ground. Chapter 1981, Trial Difficulty. What? Even the guild leader is going to train? I wonder how far the guild leader can reach. Didn't the guild leader say that he would wait for us on the second floor's training ground? That means he has to pass through the first floor. This trial is so difficult, I wonder how the guild leader will clear it. As Shifeng approached the first floor training ground, Zero Wings members stopped their respective training and turned to look at Shifeng, curious to see his performance. By this time, they had all attempted the training grounds trial already, so they knew that its difficulty was frustratingly high. Hence, they couldn't believe that Shifeng would succeed. As Shifeng got increasingly closer to the boundary of the training ground, he did not make any preparations at all, unlike everyone else. Instead, he stepped straight into the training ground, his gait not faltering even in the slightest. The moment Shifeng entered the training ground, 4 beam attacks suddenly appeared and flew straight at him. The beam attacks of the training ground appeared with no warning at all, making it impossible for players to take preemptive action to evade them. Players had to rely on their sight and quick judgment to dodge the attacks. Of course, dodging 4 of such sudden attacks would not be a problem at all for the expert players present so long as they gave it their all. However, despite seeing the beam attacks, Shifeng gave no indication of wanting to dodge them. Instead, he maintained his pace, continuing to walk forward, straight into the attacks. Shio. In the next moment, Zero Wings members saw the beam attacks pierce right through their guild leader. However, contrary to everyone's expectations, even after the 4 beam attacks faded out of existence, Shifeng still did not get sent flying backward. His pace hadn't even faltered. The beams had apparently passed through Shifeng to no effect. What's going on? I didn't see the guild leader making any evasive maneuvers. How did the guild leader do it? The spectating crowd was stunned as Shi Feng kept moving forward. The beam attacks that had repeatedly given Zero Wings members a terrible beating actually had zero effect against their guild leader. Shi Feng did not even sidestep the attacks. Right now, it looked as if Shi Feng was merely taking a leisurely stroll through his backyard as he walked toward the central magic array. The beam attacks would always miss their mark by just 1 or 2 centimeters, as if they were actively avoiding Shi Feng, and bypass him ineffectually. When Shi Feng crossed the 50-yard mark and faced 20-plus beam attacks simultaneously, one of the beams suddenly altered its trajectory just as it was about to reach Shi Feng. However, despite this abrupt change, Shi Feng reacted to it calmly and simply slashed it with one of his swords. In the end, the beam attack got sliced through cleanly. It did not even manage to slow Shi Feng's advance for even a heartbeat. Following which, as Shi Feng continued advancing, the number of beam attacks that abruptly altered their trajectories increased as well. By the time he neared the 100-yard mark, the number of transforming attacks had already reached 8. However, this increase was trivial to him. It just meant that he needed to swing his swords a few more times at most. From a spectator's perspective, it would look as if the beam attacks were attracted to his swords, as if they all automatically headed toward the weapons. Are you kidding me? Did the difficulty of this training ground change? Zero Wings members were at a loss for words as they watched Shi Feng's leisurely progress through the training ground. The players who were formerly members of adventurer teams in particular, found themselves doubting their own eyes right now. Before today they had rarely ever seen Shi Feng fighting in person. Most of their knowledge regarding Shi Feng came from battle videos. Now that they were seeing Shi Feng in action with their own eyes, however, they doubted their senses. Meanwhile, after Shi Feng crossed the 100-yard mark, the attacks he faced were no longer limited to straight beams and beams that abruptly altered their trajectories. Slashing beams joined the onslaught. The addition of the slashing beams instantly increased the surface area under threat by a significant margin. Moreover, the slashing attacks contained great power. When Shi Feng tried blocking one with his swords, he found himself stumbling back several steps. So, this is the first floor training? Shi Feng deflected a slashing attack with Killing Ray, surprised by the change in attack patterns. The first floor training was much more difficult than the Extraordinary Tower's initial entry test. If the trial before the 100-yard mark trained players' dodging capabilities, then the trial past the 100-yard mark focused on players' offensive and defensive capabilities. While Shi Feng was entertaining such thoughts in his mind, the number of slashing attacks had very quickly increased from 1 to 4. The difficulty of the trial now already rivaled that of Rhinebeck's trial, which Shi Feng had undergone to obtain the Sea God's legacy. However, despite the high difficulty, Shi Feng, who had already reached the Ascension realm, had no problem controlling his body's instinct to dodge and block the incoming attacks. This was also the most rudimentary usage of the realms of truth, the skillful utilization of one's own body. Instead of moving just his arms and legs, he had to employ his entire body. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to dodge and block all these beam attacks. Following which, under everyone's gaze, Shi Feng started advancing toward the central magic array at flying speeds. The numerous beam attacks couldn't hinder his progress at all. After a short moment, Shi Feng finally set foot on the central magic array. Shock filled the eyes of Aqua Rose and the others, who were spectating outside the training ground at this sight. Although they had long since expected that the first floor training ground wouldn't pose a problem for Shi Feng, they still had not imagined that he would clear it so effortlessly. That's it for the demonstration. You'll have to rely on yourselves to get through, Shi Feng said as he glanced at the flabbergasted crowd behind him. He then teleported to the second floor training ground. The first floor training ground provided very thorough training for players to master the Truth Realm. If not for him having already reached the Ascension Realm, he would have most likely had a difficult time reaching the central magic array, as even the slashing attacks had started altering their trajectories suddenly toward the end of the trial. Trying to defend against such attacks was extremely challenging. Merely moving one's arms and legs wouldn't be enough to cope with these attacks. One needed to coordinate their entire body with their weapons in order to effectively block and deflect these attacks. The difficulty was doing so was extremely high. At the very least, if Shi Feng were still in the Truth Realm right now, he would have an even chance of receiving a direct hit from the changing slashing attacks. In other words, if one had just entered the realms of truth and barely had any attainments, clearing the first floor trial would be impossible. Meanwhile, Shifeng's demonstration allowed everyone to understand that reaching the central magic array wasn't exactly impossible. After all, Shifeng had done so, and in a very leisurely manner at that. From start to end, he had not made any large movements at all. Is the guild leader really human? He actually got through such a challenge. After snapping out of his daze, Seven Light was bursting with excitement and motivation. So, this is the Sword King's strength? Watching Shifeng's leisurely display had likewise ignited Stubborn Bones' fighting spirit. In the past, although he knew that there was a massive gap in strength between himself and the peak experts of the various superpowers, he had attributed this disparity to the difference in basic attributes. He had believed that there wasn't much difference between them when it came to combat standards. In hindsight, he found his thoughts laughable. The difference was not limited to just basic attributes. Even his combat standard was inferior by leaps and bounds. Moreover, aside from Shifeng, he was also inferior to the guild's vice-guild leader Aqua Rose, the main force's commander Fire Dance, and the healer Violet Cloud. Only, the gaps between him and the three women were not as gigantic as the one between him and Shifeng. However, it was precisely because of this discovery that he became keen on the training ground before him. In the past, he did not know how far behind he actually was, but now he knew. Chapter 1982, Breakthrough. After Shifeng disappeared from the first floor, Zero Wings members quickly snapped out of their daze and resumed challenging the first floor trial. Extraordinary Tower's second floor training ground. So, this is the second floor's training? The scene before Shifeng took him by surprise. At this moment, the space he stood in was no longer inside the Extraordinary Tower. Instead, he had arrived in an alternate realm. Unlike the first floor training ground, the second floor training ground consisted of a mist-covered staircase, which had 100 steps, and a pair of stone doors at the top of the staircase. It was obvious the second floor trial required players to ascend this staircase and reach the stone doors. However, what caught Shifeng's attention the most was the mana density here, which was at least 50% higher than what he felt in the Extraordinary Tower. Surrounded by such concentrated mana, Shifeng felt his mind becoming extraordinarily clear. For a moment, he felt as if he could accomplish anything so long as he put his mind to it. In such a mana-rich environment, he would not have to worry about running out of stamina and concentration, even if he were to use advanced combat techniques non-stop. He could exert his full strength as much as he wanted. Shifeng finally understood why activating the second floor training ground had cost 100,000 magic crystals, why the second floor training ground required 5,000 magic crystals to operate every day, and why only 50 people could undergo the training at the same time. With such an excellent environment, as well as the fact that the training ground here provided in-depth training for the realms of truth, the second floor training ground was indeed worth every magic crystal he had paid. Given the opportunity, the various superpowers would be willing to pay 5 times that price to obtain such a training ground. After Shifeng familiarized himself with the environment here, he promptly stepped onto the snow-white staircase. Each step of the staircase was half a meter tall, requiring players to make quite a large movement just to climb one. A distance of roughly 13 yards separated each step. Even a Tier 2 expert would need some time to climb each step. They wouldn't be able to climb the next step in a single breath at the very least. The moment Shifeng climbed onto the first step, he felt his entire body weakening. His basic attributes and the improved life rating he gained from his Dark Iron bloodline became useless as soon as he set foot on the staircase. After 3 seconds, his basic attributes had fallen to the standard of a level 50, Tier 1 swordsman fully geared in bronze equipment. Even his physique had regressed to the Tier 1 standard. He was as ordinary as an ordinary player could get now. Meanwhile, before Shifeng could adapt to this sudden drop in strength, 2 Tier 1 swordsmen, who looked exactly like him and were geared in silver armor, appeared on the step he stood on. As soon as they had fully materialized, these swordsmen unsheathed their twin swords and charged at him. Within a breath of time, both level 50 Tier 1 swordsmen crossed the 10-yard distance and arrived before Shifeng. Tier 1 skill, Gale Sword. Tier 1 skill, Triple Moon Intercept. Both swordsmen used an extremely rare Tier 1 skill. Moreover, their actions were free of any unnecessary movements as they struck directly at Shifeng's vitals. Upon seeing this, Shifeng hurriedly countered by executing Sword's Orbit. Boom, boom, boom. After the swords of the two sides clashed about 5 or 6 times, Shifeng got sent flying off the staircase's first step. Meanwhile, once Shi Feng fell off the step, the two silver swordsmen did not pursue him. Instead, they returned to their original positions and stood there quietly. So strong. Shi Feng was astounded as he looked at his two opponents. Even after falling to the foot of the staircase, he had to take 5 steps back before he managed to stabilize himself. Although the clash with the silver swordsman was brief, Shi Feng understood that their combat standard was already close to reaching the refinement realm standard. Moreover, their mastery over their skills was practically perfect, with both skills executed at a 100% completion rate. Their true combat power was definitely no weaker than a true refinement realm expert's. Aside from having very high technical standards, the silver swordsman's basic attributes were also far superior to his own. If he tried to face their attacks head-on, he would definitely get sent flying. The difficulty ramped up this much just by going up a floor? Glancing at the motionless silver swordsman, Shi Feng roughly understood the difficulty rating of the second floor trial. If a flowing water realm expert were to go up against these two silver swordsmen, the said expert would have no chance of getting past even the first step. The flowing water realm allowed one to perceive the actions of one's opponents and make simple, preemptive offensive or defensive maneuvers. However, both silver swordsmen were invulnerable to damage. Attacking them would be meaningless. Moreover, doing so would only expose holes in one's defenses to the silver swordsman. Executing simple defensive maneuvers such as blocking or deflecting would result in the flowing water realm expert getting gradually pushed off the staircase step after step. As for evasive maneuvers, those were simply impossible. With the disparity in basic attributes, movement speed and reaction speed, a flowing water realm expert would find it next to impossible to dodge the attack of just one silver swordsman, let alone two. In other words, a flowing water realm expert would not be able to achieve anything on this floor. Only if said flowing water realm expert had reached the truth realm might they barely defend against the two silver swordsmen. As for refinement realm experts that had entered the truth realm, they would very likely get sent flying off the staircase on the first exchange. Following which, Shi Feng stepped onto the staircase once more. This time, however, he did not choose to receive the attacks of the two silver swordsmen directly. Instead, he skillfully brandished his two swords and redirected the attack of one of the silver swordsmen toward the other silver swordsman's attack, the two attacks canceling out each other. This then created an opportunity for Shi Feng to move past the two silver swordsmen and climb to the next step. Only climbing each step was a challenge, as he had to make huge movements to climb up the tall steps while deflecting the attacks of the two silver swordsmen. However, with each step he climbed, Shi Feng could feel his understanding of the realms of truth deepening. When he ascended to the 10th step, one more silver swordsman suddenly joined the two silver swordsmen chasing after him, instantly increasing the trial's difficulty by a large margin. Things are finally getting a little interesting. Shi Feng felt the pressure on him strengthening as he dealt with the relentless assault of the three silver swordsmen. Fortunately, it had already been quite some time since he had reached the Ascension realm. The combined assault of the three silver swordsmen was still within his tolerance range. Nevertheless, each time he wanted to climb a step, he had to prepare himself both physically and mentally for quite a while. By the time Shi Feng reached the 29th step, he was facing 4 silver swordsmen and already close to reaching his limit. When he eventually climbed to the 30th step, one of the silver swordsmen suddenly turned into a golden swordsman. Before Shi Feng could adjust to the change, the golden swordsman's improved strength and speed sent him flying back down to the 29th step. Due to the presence of the golden swordsman, Shi Feng was stuck moving back and forth between the 29th and 30th steps. As the number of times Shi Feng got sent flying increased, he began to grasp his shortcomings. His skill at utilizing external forces was still inadequate. Although he had redirected one of the silver swordsman's attacks toward the golden swordsman's strength was simply overwhelming. Before the golden swordsman's attack could be nullified, the silver swordsman's attack was crushed, and the golden swordsman's attack would continue toward him. 1 hour. 2 hours. 4 hours. After many hours had passed, when Shi Feng was faced with the golden swordsman's oncoming longsword once again, he executed Sword's orbit and filled his surroundings with a galaxy of stars. In the next moment, however, the 3 silver swordsmen's attacks involuntarily moved to greet the golden swordsman's attack. Boom. After a loud explosion echoed throughout the entire training ground, the golden swordsman went flying up a step while the 3 silver swordsmen fell down the step. At this moment, Only Shi Feng remained standing quietly on the 31st step. Wonderful. I succeeded. Shi Feng had an ecstatic expression on his face as he gazed at the collapsed golden swordsman. I finally have my own combat technique. Chapter 1983, Swords Transmigration. While Shi Feng rejoiced over the new combat technique he had successfully created and prepared to test it on the golden swordsman and 3 silver swordsmen on the 30th step, the sound of a system notification reached his ears. System, congratulations. You have created a bronze combat technique. Please name your combat technique. Shi Feng was stunned to hear the notification. Taking advantage of the distraction, the golden and silver swordsmen stood and charged towards Shi Feng in a coordinated assault. By the time Shi Feng snapped out of his daze, it was too late to defend himself. All 4 attacks struck vital points, and Shi Feng's body vanished from the 30th step, reappearing at the very bottom of the staircase. Although Shi Feng had to restart his climb from the bottom, he wasn't disappointed in the slightest. Rather, he stared at his notification window in astonishment. What? A bronze combat technique? Dubious, Shi Feng examined the system's congratulatory message. Although he knew that he hadn't created a low-standard combat technique, he didn't think that it was so amazing to be categorized as a bronze-rank combat technique. Mastering a single advanced combat technique would enable players to challenge opponents of a higher combat standard. Of course, there was a limit to how effective these combat techniques could be. For example, the advanced combat technique, Void Steps, was most effective against Flowing Water Realm experts, but the footwork technique had little to no effect against Void Realm experts or above. After all, Void Steps relied on fooling an opponent's sight. Void Realm experts used more than one sense to locate their opponents. However, bronze combat techniques were a different story. Bronze combat techniques would even be effective against Domain Realm experts. If a Domain Realm expert failed to cope with a bronze combat technique properly, it could even cost them their life. Until now, Zero Wing had only possessed a single bronze combat technique, Lightning Flash, which he had only obtained through luck from the Primordial Divine Ruin. The only other way Zero Wing's players could obtain more bronze combat techniques was by entering bronze legacy tablets, but they were extremely rare and highly coveted by the various superpowers. Unfortunately, despite many Zero Wing members attempting to learn Lightning Flash, not one of them had mastered the secret attack technique, and Shi Feng was no exception. Yet, he had just succeeded in creating his own bronze combat technique. Why wouldn't he be surprised? Of course, the technique's creation had been a coincidence. He had only created it though the inspiration he had gained as he tried to deal with the golden and silver swordsman's relentless assault. If he tried to create another bronze combat technique, he'd simply waste his time and energy. Just creating a basic combat technique required a solid foundation, and those that were capable of doing so were, without a doubt, geniuses. As for advanced combat techniques, only the various superpowers old monsters had any hope of successfully creating one. Shi Feng's success in creating a bronze combat technique was nothing short of a miracle. As Shi Feng reveled in the joy of his new bronze combat technique, the system reminded him to name the technique. A name? The combat technique he had created was a variant of Sword's Orbit that he had combined with the Realms of Truth's principles. After giving the matter some thought, Shi Feng decided, let's call it Swords Transmigration. Once Shi Feng had entered the technique's name, the system rang with another notification. System, congratulations. You are the first player to create a bronze combat technique. Rewarding 1 bronze legacy orb and the title, Bronze Legatee. As the system notification ended, a green orb appeared before Shi Feng. Creating a bronze combat technique offers such a benefit as well? Shi Feng could not help his surprise to see the green orb. Bronze Legacy Orb, Epic Rank Item. Can record up to 3 created bronze combat techniques. Players may learn the combat techniques in immersive environments. Each attempt will cost 100 magic crystals. Cooldown, 1 hour after each use. Shi Feng had heard of many experts creating their own combat techniques in the past, although those techniques had only been basic or advanced rank. However, he hadn't heard of those players receiving a recording device as he had. If other players wished to learn the combat techniques, they had to either rely on videos or receive the technique creator's personally tutelage. Unfortunately, learning a combat technique was easier said than done. Experts struggled desperately to learn basic combat techniques, even if they had the assistance of a book. It was easy to imagine how much more difficult learning a basic combat technique would be without proper guidelines, not to mention learning advanced rank or higher combat techniques. Thus far, the various superpowers had obtained quite a few bronze legacy tablets. Yet despite possessing complete legacies that provided detailed instruction, Shifeng hadn't heard of a single player mastering a bronze combat technique. Meanwhile, the bronze legacy orb allowed him to record 3 bronze combat techniques permanently. This would be a great help. Moreover, the bronze legacy orb had a very short cooldown. He could allow one player to learn the technique he had created each hour. While the bronze legacy orb wasn't as effective as an actual combat technique book, which didn't have a cost or cooldown, it was better than a bronze legacy tablet. Following which, Shifeng examined his new title. Bronze Legatee Advanced Title. When using combat techniques, expenditure is reduced by 20%. Enjoy the status of Baron in any city, kingdom, or empire. Amazing. It actually grants a global Baron status. Developing in the various major cities will be much easier now. The Bronze Legatee title's benefits surprised Shifeng. Although the Demon Hunter title was a basic title, it was extremely rare and valuable. After all, it gave him the status of a world noble, and he had greatly benefited from the title thus far. Meanwhile, the Bronze Legatee title offered him a higher status than the Demon Hunter title. Unlike an ordinary noble, a Baron would have access to greater benefits when purchasing items and lands in NPC cities. As he considered the situation, the names of a few super-large-scale neutral cities came to Shifeng's mind. These super-large-scale neutral cities were similar to the Sea of Trees. All of the various superpowers wanted access to these cities to conduct business. Only, unlike the Sea of Trees, these neutral were not located within secret lands. Gaining entry to these cities was much easier. Every one of these neutral cities had a player population of over 20 million in the past, even more than ordinary empires' imperial capitals. Hence, the various superpowers had frequently fought over dominance in these cities, while first-rate guilds and below had only been able to watch from the sidelines. I think the minimum level requirement to activate a super-large-scale neutral NPC city was level 70? Now that I have the Bronze Legatee title, I can go and take a look. Shifeng immediately decided to set aside his Realms of Truth training. He knew that he had already exhausted his current potential at this point, and he wouldn't gain anything from continuing his training right now. If he wished to progress in the second floor trial, he needed inspiration. Following which, Shifeng took out a return scroll and left the extraordinary tower. Chapter 1984, White River City promoted Starmoon Kingdom, White River City. When Shifeng returned to White River City's teleportation hall once again, he discovered that the hall was quite busy. The teleportation hall had recently transformed, becoming even more magnificent than before. What? The city has been promoted? Shifeng was slightly surprised as he gazed around the building's interior. Originally, only the first floor hall had teleportation arrays, but now the second and third floors of the open-air hall had their own arrays as well. The higher a teleportation array was located, the farther it could transfer players. Moreover, multiple platforms now floated around the main hall. These floating platforms could transport players to the second and third floors, and if players wished to, they could pay a small fee to teleport to White River City's airport, Central Plaza, or business district. The floating platforms moved even faster than dark gold mounts, becoming the fastest mode of transportation in White River City. By using these platforms, players could save plenty of time while moving around the city. While this new function might not seem like much, NPC cities would grow larger as they were promoted, accommodating more players. After a certain rank, running from one end of the city to the other would require a considerable amount of time. Although floating platforms had fixed destinations, they could save players half the travel time. Normally, NPC cities only activated the floating platform function once they had become a main city with a certain level of prosperity. However, this prosperity wasn't the equivalent to the city's player population. Rather, it referred to economic interactions between players and NPCs, as well as the shop's quantity and quality within the city walls. Thus far, only the various empires' imperial capitals had unlocked the floating platform function, and they had only done so recently. Kingdom's capital cities were still some time away from the upgrade, yet White River City had achieved the feat. As Shifeng walked through the city streets, he discovered that White River City was far livelier than it had been before the latest promotion. The number of merchant players in the city in particular had increased drastically. Moreover, more shops lined the streets now that the city streets had been broadened. Selling level 50 secret silver leather armor. Prices open for negotiation. Selling various types of level 50 equipment with magic resistance. Welcoming long-term partnerships with adventurer teams. Purchasing energy essence and primordial crystals in bulk. Offer available long-term. Idle and merchant players fervently hawked their wares, all selling much higher quality products than during Shifeng's last visit to White River City. During his last visit, only the guild-operated shops had sold level 50 secret silver equipment, but now even idle and merchant players announced that such items were for sale. The city's various shops had even put up level 50 dark gold equipment on display, although their prices were ridiculously high. Not even guild experts could afford these equipment pieces. Once Shifeng had seen enough, he rented a floating platform and made his way to White River City's business district. Due to the recent promotion, the main street had changed significantly. Rather than a street, it looked like a commercial plaza. Not only had it tripled in size, but it was now home to a building that was over 70 stories tall. This building was none other than White River City's auction house. When the auction house had been upgraded, it had gained new functions. Players weren't the only ones who could consign items for auction anymore. Even NPCs held basic and intermediate auctions a few times a week. In addition, players could browse and purchase items that players sold from 1/4 of Starmoon Kingdom's towns and cities. Previously, players had only been able to view and buy items from White River City and its neighboring NPC cities. If players wished to find and purchase specific items, doing so at White River City's auction house was now the best option. Meanwhile, the most valuable of the auction house's new functions was the auction arena. Might was right in God's domain, and the game's auction houses were no exception to this rule. Once the auction arena activated, the auction house would hold a competition each day. The auction house would offer various rare items as prizes during these competitions, and players only needed to pay the entry fee to take part. The competition had 2 phases. The first phase was a test the system decided, and the second involved a battle between players. However, equipment wouldn't help players in this battle. The competition focused on testing players' financial strength and resources. While combat standards were also tested, they were insignificant in comparison. When the auction arena had been introduced in the past, it had caused quite the stir in God's domain. Merchant players that hadn't been suited for combat had gone mad over the arena, and while many of them had taken part in the competition themselves, some had also hired experts to fight in their place. Countless merchant players had made their fortunes through the auction arena, and some experts had obtained top-tier weapons, equipment, and tools with their success in the arena. Of course, due to the auction arena, God's domain's influence in the real world had expanded. However, the auction arena's appearance had also been responsible for the various superpowers' violent frenzy that had followed. It's finally time to wrestle over the city's management rights. Shifeng took a deep breath as he gazed up at the towering White River City auction house. NPC cities were different from guild cities. During the game's early stages, the various powers had to rely on player count and shop economy to spread their influence in an NPC city. These powers also used physical and economic oppression on those who moved against them. Even so, they couldn't gain any substantial authority in an NPC city. But once the auction arena activated, players could secure the auction house's management rights. While this change might not seem like much, a city's auction house was extremely important to players' daily lives. Taking control of an auction house was akin to controlling the NPC city's lifeblood, indirectly controlling the player economy. If someone obtained an auction house's management rights, they could bar certain players from the auction house, for example. This would be a fatal blow to the city's independent players and various major powers. Both relied on the auction house as their main source of income, and without it, independent players couldn't sell their items and guilds couldn't purchase materials. One could easily imagine the consequences of losing access to an auction house. The competition for an auction house's management rights would be held once a month on a fixed date. All NPC cities with auction arenas would hold the competition at the same time, preventing the various superpowers, who had an absolute advantage in terms of resources and experts, from monopolizing every NPC city in the game. Unfortunately, this arrangement also restricted the various large guilds' development. Guilds only had a limited number of resources and expert players, and the more NPC cities they controlled, the fewer resources and experts they could allocate to each location. Occupying a large number of NPC cities would be impossible for guilds that lacked sturdy foundations. Of course, only Shifeng knew about this right now. The auction arena function wouldn't activate the moment the auction house had been promoted. It would only activate once a certain number of auction houses in God's domain had risen to the appropriate rank. Although the auction arena hadn't activated yet, this did remind Shifeng that he had to prepare funds and resources for the inevitability. Currently, Zero Wing's foundations were slightly stronger than an ordinary first-rate guild, and it would be some time before the Manatite vein affected the guild's development in a significant way. Following which, Shifeng entered the Candlelight trading firm and notified Melancholic Smile, instructing her to bring him the Tier 1 mysterious flames the guild had collected so far. He then took his fire spirit to the warehouse that housed the Holy Grail. He intended to increase his strength before he left to activate a super large-scale neutral city. The quest to do so was even more difficult than an ordinary epic quest after all, and he'd only get himself killed if he didn't prepare. Chapter 1985, Strengthening Fire Spirit Candlelight Trading Firm's Private Warehouse. Due to the Holy Grail, divine might filled the entire room. The divine might's powerful pressure would even suppress Tier 1 expert players until they moved as slow as turtles. Despite having the strength to rival great lords of the same level, even Shifeng felt uncomfortable as he entered the warehouse, his movements becoming somewhat sluggish. Shifeng hadn't originally planned to use the Holy Grail since the power of evolution was so costly, and he wouldn't get a refund if the evolution attempt failed. However, if he wished to complete a super large-scale neutral city's activation quest, he needed to grow stronger. He had to rely on the fire spirit. To increase his chances for success, he had no choice but to gamble on the Holy Grail. As Shifeng arrived before the stone platform housing the Holy Grail, he retrieved a crimson crystal ball from his bag. The crystal ball was none other than the fire spirit. Despite being an epic item, he could only use it to summon one Tier 2 fire spirit of the same level in exchange for 5 magic crystals. It was a toy compared to the Bible of Darkness. Even a Tier 2 summoning scroll could call forth a stronger creature than the Tier 2 fire spirit. The item simply didn't deserve its epic rank. This was also why Shifeng had decided to upgrade the fire spirit. The stronger an item was, the lower its chances would be for success, and before devouring any mysterious flames, the fire spirit could only be considered an epic item at best. Its quality would only increase after absorbing powerful mysterious flames. If nurtured properly, this crystal ball could even become stronger than fragmented legendary items. Shifeng then had the Holy Grail scan the orb in his hand. Dark purple mist emerged from the Grail, enveloping the crimson orb in Shifeng's hand. After 5 seconds, Shifeng received a system notification. System. Designated item cannot be evolved to fragmented legendary rank. Cannot be evolved? Shifeng was stunned. He had never imagined that the fire spirit was so special. Despite being an epic item, the Holy Grail couldn't force an upgrade to fragmented legendary rank. However, as Shifeng began to feel disappointed, the sound of a second notification reached his ears. System. Do you wish to sacrifice 5,000 HP to enhance fire spirit's effects? Enhance its effects. Shifeng was surprised again to read the words in his notification window. However, he was stupefied to see the cost of this enhancement. How fraudulent. Evolving the Blacksteel insignia had only cost 1,000 HP, yet enhancing the fire spirit's effects cost 5,000. 5,000 HP was significant even to a Tier 2 metric tons. Very powerful level 70 Tier 2 MTs would only have 100,000 HP at most, and the cost was taken from the player's base HP. Taking into account the percentage HP modifiers on weapons and equipment, players would lose far more than just 5,000 HP. But even after considering his options, Shifeng gritted his teeth and agreed to the cost. While 5,000 HP was a painful amount to lose, even for him, the fire spirit was extraordinarily valuable. Most importantly, he wasn't attempting to evolve the item to fragmented legendary rank. He could only enhance its effects. Logically, the risk of failure shouldn't be as high. Moreover, HP wasn't particularly important for a swordsman player like himself, and he could also rely on his bloodline to compensate for the loss. With the bloodline, he gained a lot more HP than ordinary players with each level up. He wouldn't suffer as much of an impact by losing 5,000 HP as other players. After Shifeng agreed to enhance the fire spirit, more purple mist spilled out of the Holy Grail, far denser than it had been a moment ago. So much mist spilled out that it filled the private warehouse. As the purple mist continued to seep into the fire spirit, the miniature flame dragon woke and roared again and again. The sound pierced through its crystalline cage and echoed throughout the warehouse. Due to the purple mist's invasion, the baby dragon began to grow. In less than 10 seconds, the baby dragon had transformed into a mature flame dragon and was nearly twice as large. Intelligence flashed in its eyes, no longer lacking emotion as it had earlier. Was it a success? Shifeng could not help his growing excitement as he gazed at the adult flame dragon. God's Domain's players might not know about fire spirits, but Shifeng was very familiar with the items. He also recognized how valuable an intelligent fire spirit was. To put it simply, the difference between a fire spirit with higher intelligence and an ordinary fire spirit was like the difference between an expert and an ordinary player. Even if both fire spirits possessed the same basic attributes, the combat power they could exert would be worlds apart. Many powers had gotten their hands on fire spirits in the past, but trying to increase a fire spirit's intelligence wasn't easy. One would only have a chance of triggering an intelligence growth by sacrificing Tier 2 and above mysterious flames. Unfortunately, despite many owners feeding their fire spirits the appropriate mysterious flames, very few had succeeded in increasing their fire spirit's intelligence. A fire spirit was a very special epic item with endless potential. Countless experts had even guessed that by feeding the item enough mysterious flames, a fire spirit could grow to become a Tier 6 god. Even Tier 6 god-ranked players would flee from a Tier 6 god with higher intelligence. Once the purple mist had dissipated, Shifeng carefully picked up the fire spirit and inspected its attribute panel. As expected of the Holy Grail. Despite the fact that I haven't fed it any mysterious flames, the fire spirit has already grown so much? Shifeng was ecstatic when he saw the fire spirit's updated attributes. The new fire spirit didn't summon an ordinary Tier 2 fire spirit, but a bona fide Tier 2 advanced fire spirit with higher intelligence. Moreover, the advanced fire spirit would be 10 levels higher than the player that summoned it. An advanced fire spirit's life rating was only slightly inferior to an archaic species, and since it had higher intelligence, its combat power could rival ordinary great lords of the same level. An advanced fire spirit would provide far more assistance than ordinary Tier 3 monsters as well, possessing even more spells than a Tier 2 elementalist. A Tier 2 advanced fire spirit would likely beat a challenging Tier 2 peak expert black and blue. Advanced fire spirits could cast their spells with a 100% completion rate, and their basic attributes were far higher than Tier 2 players of the same level dash. While Shifeng marveled at the new and improved fire spirit, Melancholic Smile contacted him and reported, "Guild leader, I've gathered the Tier 1 mysterious flames you asked for." "Good. I'll head there right away." Shifeng nodded. He then disconnected the call and visited his special forging room on the top floor. Chapter 1986, Consecutive Growth. In one of the Candlelight trading firm's top-floor special forging rooms. As Shifeng entered the room, the sight of Melancholic Smile organizing various crystal balls on a stone table greeted him. Each crystal ball contained a Tier 1 mysterious flame, and there were easily over 20 of them on the table. If other guilds saw this collection of Tier 1 mysterious flames, they'd be astonished. Everyone in God's domain was privy to the existence of mysterious flames by this stage of the game. They knew that these unique flames were a great help to forgers and alchemists. Hence, the various major powers fought over any mysterious flame they came across. They wouldn't even pass over a Tier 1 mysterious flame. After all, mysterious flames were extremely rare and even coveted by superpowers master-level crafters. "Guild leader, here are all the Tier 1 mysterious flames we have collected so far. There are a total of 23. One did find another flame in the Blackwing auction house, but the bidding was intense. In the end, the price rose past our 5,000 gold budget, and another guild purchased it for 8,300 gold, Melancholic Smile said. She hadn't fully understood how valuable Tier 1 mysterious flames were since collecting the first few had been relatively easy with the clues Shifeng had provided. Furthermore, the guild shared the flame Shifeng used, and his mysterious flame was much stronger than Tier 1. She certainly hadn't expected a Tier 1 mysterious flame to sell for more than an ordinary epic item. Shifeng nodded in response. He then asked, "How is our business with Secret coming along?" The basic arrangements have been completed. We have even started to sell many of our products through secrets channels, but as we are only a basic member, we can only sell our products in up to 80 of the Chamber's NPC cities. Among them, only 25 can be within empires, and only 5 of those can be major cities. Of the 55 kingdom cities, we can only select 10 major cities, Melancholic Smile said, a little excited. Currently, the Candlelight trading firm's influence only reached across a little over 50 NPC cities, nearly half of which were located in Starmoon Kingdom. Now that Candlelight had joined the Secret Chamber of Commerce, it had access to an additional 80 cities. This more than doubled Candlelight's sales channels. Secret is quite impressive, to think it can even give its basic members 80 city slots. Shifeng was slightly astonished by Melancholic Smile's report. Joining a Chamber of Commerce in God's domain didn't mean that one would gain immediate and full access to its sales channels. That depended on one's rank within the alliance. Normally, newcomers were given positions as basic members. Only powerful superpowers could be promoted to an advanced member upon joining. Based on Shifeng's knowledge, most chambers only granted 60 city slots to basic members, yet Secret had given them 80. It was clear how powerful Secret's foundations were. Guild leader, here is the list of cities we've selected. Once we begin our collaboration, Candlelight's income will double at the very least. We won't have to worry about lacking development funds, Melancholic Smile said, smiling as she took out a list and handed it to Shifeng. She had worked with Aqua Rose to choose the cities on the list. They had decided to do business in a total of 3 empires and 6 kingdoms, and although they couldn't sell all of their products in the selected kingdoms and empires, as doing so would be unprofitable, they wouldn't have to worry about a lack of customers. They would have chosen many more kingdoms and empires had they not been limited by a specific number of cities. After all, they couldn't afford to waste the referral fee they had paid to the Secret Chamber of Commerce. I see no issues with the chosen cities, Shifeng said. Changing topics, Shifeng asked, how is the resuscitation potions production coming along? Silent Wonder and the others are doing their best to brew the potion now. Moreover, Candlelight has recently gained another Master Alchemist. Now we have a total of 4 Master Alchemists working on the potion, and they have made over 3 bottles thus far, Melancholic Smile replied. She had very high hopes for the resuscitation potion. It was, after all, a potion that allowed players to resurrect themselves without losing any EXP. Moreover, the production cost for each bottle was only a little over 20 silver. Although the potion required a lot of rare materials, it had become very easy for Zero Wing to acquire what it needed with the Secret Chamber of Commerce's connections. Good. Continue production. Later, try to nurture as many Master Alchemists as possible. We need to ensure that we have enough people to learn the recipes Yu Zipping's group obtains, Shifeng said, chuckling. The resuscitation potion had been extremely popular during his previous life. At one point it had even sold for 3 gold per bottle. 3 gold was incredibly expensive even for ordinary expert players, not to mention ordinary players. Only the various adventurer teams and guilds could possibly afford such a price. Normally, he wouldn't have bothered to push for so many resuscitation potions since there was a limit to the number of adventurer teams and guilds in Zero Wing's territories, but now that Candlelight had joined the Secret Chamber of Commerce, they didn't have to worry about a lack of customers. Hence, they needed to craft as many resuscitation potions as possible. After Shifeng finished giving Melancholic Smile her latest instructions, he shifted his focus to the mysterious flames on the table. While one Tier 1 mysterious flame might be of little help to the fire spirit, he had a total of 23 on hand. Furthermore, he had upgraded his fire spirit to advanced rank. An advanced fire spirit would gain more from absorbing mysterious flames than a normal fire spirit. As Shifeng pulled the fire spirit from his bag, the flame dragon within quickly noticed the Tier 1 mysterious flames on the table and grew restless. Start absorbing. Show me how much you can grow. Shifeng immediately picked up a Tier 1 mysterious flames and placed it before the fire spirit. Like a hungry wolf, the flame dragon burst forth from the crystal ball and pounced on the mysterious flame. As the flame dragon devoured the mysterious flame, the flame grew weaker until it eventually vanished. Although the fire spirit's attributes hadn't transformed, the little dragon began to emit more heat. Its previously blurry form also began to sharpen. Shifeng immediately chose to feed the fire spirit another Tier 1 mysterious flame. With each mysterious flame the fire spirit devoured, the flame dragon's figure became clearer. By the time it had absorbed its seventh mysterious flame, Shifeng could see the scales across the flame dragon's body. After devouring the eighth mysterious flame, the flame dragon began to expand, releasing a low growl. The fire spirit's attributes finally changed. Tier 3? Shifeng's excitement grew when he saw the new attributes. Tier 3 meant that the fire spirit had now reached the Great Lord standard. With its higher intelligence, it was even more powerful than a Tier 3 peak expert of the same level. Following which, Shifeng continued to feed the fire spirit Tier 1 mysterious flames. 12th, 15th, 20th. Finally, after the fire spirit absorbed the 21st mysterious flame, it underwent a transformation. Not only did the flame dragon grow larger, but Shifeng could also sense that its life rating had improved. Wonderful. I finally succeeded. Shifeng's eyes glowed as he gazed at his fire spirit. Chapter 1987 E-Giant Race. The flames that surrounded the fire spirit's body expanded drastically, transforming from their original crimson color to a scorching white. Even the space around the flame dragon began to show signs of crumbling under the power of its flames. Tier 3 Archaic Species? Shifeng's heart skipped a beat when he examined the attribute panel. He hadn't thought that a measly 24 or so Tier 1 mysterious flames would be enough to upgrade the fire spirit to a Tier 3 Archaic Species. So many powers in his past had fed their fire spirits a large number of Tier 1 mysterious flames, yet the results of their efforts had been disappointing. Most powers had only nurtured their fire spirits into Tier 3 Archaic Species after feeding them a significant number of Tier 2 flames. Shifeng had assumed that his fire spirit would grow to the Tier 3 standard at most, and he'd have to feed it Tier 2 mysterious flames if he wanted it to become an archaic species. He hadn't expected the advanced fire spirit's absorption rate to be so effective. Now that his advanced fire spirit was a Tier 3 archaic species with higher intelligence, its combat power should be even greater than an ordinary Grand Lord of the same level. Though, if it really came down to a one-on-one fight, the advanced fire spirit would still have a high chance of losing since actual Grand Lords had far more HP. However, Shifeng was satisfied with these results. Although he could summon Kite and Anna to help him with his quest, he did not want to risk them. Resurrecting personal guards was very troublesome, and even if he resurrected them, they'd need quite some time to recover their losses. Fortunately, the fire spirit was a different story. Even if it died, he could simply spend magic crystals to resummon it. Furthermore, each time he summoned the fire spirit, now that it was a Tier 3 archaic species, he only had to spend 300 magic crystals. Moreover, its cooldown was even shorter than the Bible of Darkness's demon summoning. He only had to wait 30 minutes to resummon the fire spirit. However, unlike the Bible of Darkness, he could only summon a single fire spirit to fight for him at a time. Once Shifeng had finished upgrading the fire spirit, he collected a small stock of magic crystals and left the Candlelight trading firm. He then made his way towards the Adventurers Association in Starmoon City. Although God's domain didn't have many super large-scale neutral cities, there was one near every few empires and dozen or so kingdoms. Like the fairy country's Forest City, these super large-scale neutral cities served as trade hubs between the game's neutral races and the nearby empires and kingdoms. To enter super large-scale neutral cities like the Sea of Trees, players had to complete specific quests. The neutral city Shifeng aimed to activate was called Thunder Axe City, home to the giant race. Appearance-wise, giants looked no different than humans, only larger. Generally, giants stood at least 4 meters tall, and their physiques were even more powerful than Oars. Giants were born for combat. Aside from the Titan race, giants' defense was the highest among the numerous neutral races. In the past, Giant Shield Warrior and Guardian Knight players had been incredibly popular among the various major powers. Some of the various superpowers had even pressured some of their members to convert to the giant race since there was nothing that prohibited neutral race players from joining human guilds. However, they would be restricted within human cities. But how could such a small issue compare to the benefits of having a powerful MT? Of course, while the giants' advantages were obvious, their flaws were just as glaring. Giants weren't very skilled with magic, and their mobility was atrocious compared to humans. Defeating players or monsters that were particularly fast and agile would give giant players a massive headache. These obvious weaknesses were the reason many players refused to become giants. There had been far fewer giant players than half-elf and beastkin players in the past. Meanwhile, as a super large-scale neutral city, Thunder Axe City had a wide variety of unique aspects. Chief among them was the city's location within the Icefire Mountain Range, a neutral map that was rich in ores. Due to their environment, giants were experts in the art of forging. Their forging techniques had been passed down from the Titan race, making their standards even superior to the dwarves. This was also one of the reasons that Shi Feng had chosen Thunder Axe City. Although Zero Wing Current had many advantages, its position in the Ore Empire was still precarious, and it would only get worse as time passed. The guild's foundation was too weak, and it had too few experts. While Zero Wing had enough manpower and resources to defend its current position in the Empire, it didn't have enough to launch an assault against its enemies. Zero Wing might possess more resources and experts than ordinary first-rate guilds, but it was an infant compared to the various superpowers. Zero Wing didn't have nearly as much territory as the various superpowers after all. Starmoon Kingdom, Starmoon City. Once Shi Feng had arrived in Starmoon City, he immediately headed for the kingdom's Adventurers Association. Starmoon City hadn't developed nearly as much as White River City, and most of the players that visited the Adventurers Association were level 55 or 66 elite players. Level 58 or higher expert players were still far and few between. Without hesitation, Shi Feng headed to the second floor and approached one of its counters. Lord Spirit Slayer, how may I be of service today? The NPC beauty manning the counter asked with a smile. I wish to pick up an exploration quest, Shi Feng said. Very well. The NPC clerk revealed a list containing a large number of exploration quests and handed it to Shi Feng. Lord Spirit Slayer, these are all of the exploration quests you can accept right now. With a nod, Shi Feng carefully examined the list. The Adventurers Association had many quests to offer, and among them the most difficult were Crusade and Exploration quests. Meanwhile, only players who had reached level 70 and 3-star status in the association could accept Thunder Axe City's Exploration quest. Although 3-star adventurers could accept the Exploration quest, it was even more challenging than ordinary epic quests. Players had only entered Thunder Axe City in Shi Feng's previous life after he had reached level 75. At the time, peak experts had already reached level 77 and beyond and were geared in level 75 top-tier weapons and equipment. I'll take this quest, Shi Feng said as he pointed to a quest named Giant's Hideout. Very well. I will mark you down as this quest challenger. Please pay a 1,000 gold deposit. Should you abandon this quest, your deposit will not be returned, the NPC clerk informed him. The other Tier 2 experts picking up quests on the second floor were astonished to hear the NPC clerk's comment. Crap. What kind of quest is that? A 1,000 gold deposit? That can't be real, right? Even my 2-star quest only required a 3 gold deposit. Many of the Tier 2 experts stared at Shi Feng's cloaked figure in shock. Normally, the Adventurers Association only charged 3% to 5% of a quest's reward as a deposit fee, preventing players from picking up quests they had no hope of completing. The fact that Shi Feng's quest cost 1,000 gold meant that its reward was worth at least 20,000 gold. After Shi Feng accepted the quest, the sound of a system notification reached his ears. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.